purposes. And it's where the movie Witches of Eastwick was filmed in this mansion. The movie with Jack Nicholson, Cher, Michelle Pfeiffer, and I forget who else was in it.
They tried to make a TV series of that, and it flopped.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, one other thing we had a close encounter, by the way, so to speak, with Whitley Strieber.
Oh,
right. And, I said...
Snowball's chance in hell.
Yeah, Snowball's chance in hell. We used this blue snowball mic on last week's show. That's why he keeps talking to us about the Snowball's chance in hell. Anyway.
Well, I was talking about getting Whitley on the show.
Right, which is the same thing.
Fish.
So I asked Whitley, and he starts ranting about, well, all these people attacking me in the forums again. I said, you know what? Our forums consist of believers, people in the middle, and skeptics. He said, well, that must reflect then your audience. I said, it's a fraction of our audience. Let's be honest. Probably 2% of our audience goes to the forums at forum.theparacast.com. Not because they're bad forums. They're one of the larger forums of paranormal discussion on the planet. The thing is here, most people don't have the time to go places like that. So they don't participate. But I said, look, you're getting a nationwide, worldwide audience. And unlike most paranormal shows, Chris is a real paranormal field investigator. I am a real broadcast journalist. We're going to be fair with you. We're not going to ask you softball questions, but we're not going to attack you. We're going to ask you questions. And he says, well, you know what? I finished doing interviews for my current book. Maybe when my next book is out. No. And he ran out as fast as he could. It's kind of like, if you remember, I told a story on this show on the Tech Night Owl Live of a couple of encounters I had with the late Steve Jobs. The guy, of course, was co-founder of Apple, the famous tech guru and inventor. And I remember talking to him a couple of times. And when he got his fill of me, which would be very quick, of course, as most people just want to run away from me when they meet me the first time, he would continue to answer the question as he walked away as fast as he could. And I think Whitley Strieber must have remembered something or learned something from Steve Jobs.
He's a real strange fish. I'm telling you. I did a couple of book signings with him years ago, and I mentioned that I had a group sighting in New Paltz at one of the pivotal weekends that are mentioned in Communion. Of course, I didn't find out about the correlation until years later, but I think I've described the sighting on the show. And I mentioned this to him, and he asked what the date was, and I gave him the date, and he literally turned on his heels and ran away from me. And that was the last time I ever talked to him. And then I see him at the show, and he goes, "Oh, no, we've never met." And I said, "Oh, yeah, we have." He's an interesting fish. I don't know what to make of him. He's a very, very accomplished writer, incredibly good writer. But
he shouldn't be so temperamental. I mean, if his experiences are precisely as he says they are, okay? If he's telling us the truth, he should be happy, and he's been in the media for years, to defend himself and to answer the question, not worry about the fact that I might ask him a tough question, because I will, or that our listeners will deliver questions that are tough because they will, or Chris won't ask a tough question, because if what he says is true, if his experiences are genuine, he should understand that people are going to be skeptical and they're going to want him to, by proof if he can provide it, or just the logic of his descriptions, to answer the questions. And the invitation's still out for him, but he shouldn't be afraid of this. Just going on there for a love fest for a couple of hours, that might happen on some shows. It's not going to happen on the Paracast.
Well, since, 87, 88, he's had this rabid, fan base who just, accept everything that he's written about his alleged experiences at face value. And that's obviously how he and Ann prefer it. They like to be surrounded by the sycophants and the worshipers, similar to what I was seeing around Stan Romanek. One thing that was a little irksome for me is Bruce Maccabee. Hopefully he's okay. It's unlike him to cancel at the last minute, but Bruce had to cancel. And instead of grabbing any number of very accomplished speakers and researchers, investigators who were there at the conference, they quickly turned around and filled the slot with Stan Romanek and his wife, Lisa.
And what's unfortunate here is, you think here, this had to be a last-minute decision, we understand, but this is the opposite of what Bruce Maccabee would have done. Totally the opposite. We have a really interesting show today because we're going to look at strange things, possibly ancient astronauts or godlike beings of the past. And you've assembled a guy here named Scott Allen Roberts. Chris, tell us.
Well, Scott's a very interesting guy. I'm really not that familiar with his work prior to this, but he has a book out on the Nephilim, which I think is a very interesting, intriguing topic. Of course, the Nephilim were the godlike giants that existed supposedly thousands of years ago, and of course are mentioned in the Bible. And in Zecharia Sitchin's work, you'll find mentioned. So I think the historical aspect of this and how it was documented in some of the ancient texts is a very intriguing subject, and I think one that our listeners will be fascinated with.
And he has a magazine out called Intrepid, by the way. It's boldly going somewhere, and I guess we're going to have to find out where he's taking it and also about that book, which I've been looking at as we've been talking, The Rise and Fall of the Nephilim, the untold story of fallen angels. Wow. He's got quite a picture there. You know, you have this gentleman with the wings, and you have this woman who's rather attractive looking on the cover. It might be just enough reason to buy the book. Scott Allen Roberts coming up next. You're in
the Paracast.
So here's what happened. I was placing an order online. The site went down. It just stopped responding. It took hours before it returned, but I'd already placed the order with another company. If your site goes down, you could lose business. And if you have a business or personal site, you'll want to know it's easy to run and it will stay online. At iWeb, your site is hosted on one of the most reliable networks in the world. Check it out. iWeb.com. That's iWeb.com.
You expect professional service from your doctor, your accountant, and even the girl who takes your morning coffee order. Why not from your domain registrar, too? Namecheap.com provides stellar service with no sneaky upselling. We offer more features and security options for your website than there are ways to order a latte. And new domains come with a WhoIsGuard to protect your personal info. At Namecheap.com, you can get your domain for as low as $2.99. Now is a great time to get to know Namecheap.com.
IRS, the three most dreaded letters of the alphabet. If you owe back taxes, have unfiled tax returns, are receiving threatening letters, or have IRS agents coming to your home or place of business, you need an experienced IRS agent fighting on your side. Call the Tax Relief Division of the Law Offices of Craig Zimmerman at 800-342-8068. Spearheaded by a former IRS agent, we know how to negotiate a reduction in the tax you owe, stop wage garnishments, lift bank levies, and negotiate an affordable repayment plan. With 17 years as a practicing attorney and an A+ Better Business rating, we'll get the IRS off your back once and for all. In fact, recently, when an IRS employee had a tax problem, she called us. Stop being afraid and call right now for your free consultation at 800-342-8068. The phone call is free and there's no obligation, so call 800-342-8068. Again, that's 800-342-8068. Actual results based on individual client circumstances.
What if pain could be reduced, ailments could be alleviated, physical and mental stress could be eased, and blood circulation increased, all by simply lying down? Introducing the original Biomat. The Biomat is an FDA-registered medical device that combines deep-penetrating infrared space-age technology and revitalizing negative ions with the incredible healing power of amethyst crystals. A Biomat can boost your immune system, relieve pain and stiffness, reduce stress and fatigue, and assists in detoxifying your body. Join the thousands of people reporting relief from chronic pain, fibromyalgia, arthritis, sports injuries, insomnia, and much more. Each Biomat comes with a lifetime trade-in and 3-year warranty. Learn more at bio-mats.com, spelled bio-mats.com, or call 360-944-8692. That's 360-944-8692. Visit bio-mats.com today and enhance your life with a Biomat.
Do you suffer from low-functioning adrenal or thyroid? Did you know that mercury from your dental fillings comes off of your teeth both as a vapor and as particles into your body? Wherever mercury deposits in your body, it stops cells from functioning normally. Animal studies show that mercury causes kidney function to drop by 60%. Mercury deposited into your adrenals or thyroid will cause a corresponding drop in function. The number one method by which your body detoxifies itself of mercury is glutathione. The number one superfood that helps turn on all 10 trillion cells of your body to produce glutathione is non-denatured whey protein from grass-fed cows. After investigating most high-end whey proteins on the market, only one is the most non-denatured, the most active, the most complete, and in our opinion, the most powerful in what nature originally put into the fresh raw whey. It is One World Whey. Call 888-988-3325. That's 888-988-3325. Or visit oneworldwhey.com. That's oneworldwhey.com.
We'd like to hear from you. If you have a comment or question about the Paracast, send it to news@theparacast.com. That's news@theparacast.com. And if you'd like to catch up on past episodes, we have hundreds of shows for you to download, direct from theparacast.com. That's theparacast.com. Or check us out at iTunes.
On the Paracast with Gene and Chris, we have Scott Allen Roberts. He has a new book called The Rise and Fall of the Nephilim, the untold story of fallen angels, giants on the earth. And as I was saying, Scott, before you joined us, I like the picture, especially of that woman on the cover. I think that makes the book.
Thank you.
Right. Was she based on a live person or just a drawing?
Well, that was a painting, and I cannot pronounce the guy's name. He's one of the, I guess, the older masters, but not as old as your Renaissance masters, somebody in the late 1800s. Can't remember his name. It's in the book. It's a French name. But that is actually a picture of Cupid running off with, and I can't think of what her name is either. And I thought it was a great picture. It was, the whole concept out there behind the Nephilim for a lot of people is that it's fallen angels, and there was this angelic connection, which I don't think there is. But that's the why I put that picture on the cover. I thought it was very evocative of what the topic is about.
Let's go back into your involvement in the subject, how you started. What is your background?
Well, my background is conservative, fundamentalist, Baptist, Bible college and seminary, and that's where all my training took place. And in that setting, we were always taught, the Bible is our only foundation for faith and practice. And while I don't want to step on anybody's toes or necessarily offend anybody's religious sensibilities, I found that just didn't answer some of the questions I had.
So in general, you started out as what they call in the common vernacular, the religious right.
Yes, religious right. As a matter of fact, some of my background even involved working for people who did work for the moral majority back in the early 1980s.
Now, the moral majority, was that the first Tea Party?
I don't think so, because I don't see the Tea Party as being as far religiously right as the moral majority. I see them in a different vein than that. I think you've got a lot of your religious right that wants to be involved with the Tea Party because they say, well, they uphold our certain standards, and I don't know why it is. But it seems like you see an awful lot of conservatives tend to that more religious right side. And I'm conservative, but I'm not part of the religious right. So I bristle at that notion a little bit myself.
I understand. Okay, so when you start considering the fact of physical beings, perhaps, that came here in ancient times.
Yes.
Heresy or what? How did you get caught up in this?
I can tell you this. The reason I did a study on the Nephilim was I had questions about who they were. I always saw the passage in Genesis, and what I didn't know, and the way it was never taught, was that it's really the preamble to the flood of Noah story in the book of Genesis. And so what I did with this book is I wanted to look at the theological slant and say, if I want to compare it to anything else that's out there, other theories that are out there, I've got to separate myself in a bit and look at it as part of the religious mythology out there of the flood stories, of the creation stories, and try to get down to some facts. And I say rather tongue-in-cheek, it's kind of like me saying, well, of course fairies exist because the leprechauns say so. I'm supporting the theology from within the theology to take a look at it and see what it's really saying. And once I got below the surface of the surface stories and the things that were taught in church and synagogue, things like that, I found a very different version of events starting to come out when you get into the Hebrew language and start tearing it apart a bit and saying, what's the subtext here? Is this a cover story for a different kind of an event? Is it just an allegory? Is it mythology? And, of course, you can't prove any of that because there's no way to bring any of this into scrutiny under some kind of scientific methodology. But the methodology that adheres is one that says there are so many cultural references to this kind of event that seem to cross-reference with this, only with different names, different series of events, crossover tie-in threads through this whole thing. You say something happened, and something happened big in human history, but it's hard to eradicate it from theology because it's housed in the theological histories of so many different cultures.
Okay, the thing I always wonder about stories like this, you have similar stories in various sacred texts around the world, but we didn't have 24/7 cable, a couple of thousand years ago. So how did these stories get spread from one place to another, or did these advanced beings just go everywhere and talk to people?
Well, here's something I even poke a little fun at it in my book. It's either there was some huge spiritual religious symposium 7,000 years ago, and they all smoked the same peyote and all went back to their various cultures with this story and said, we're just going to put our twist on it. Or there was an event or series of events that were commonplace around the world, and many different cultures experienced them. As for the flood account, which I'll reference that a lot because the Nephilim are really the preamble to the flood account in the Genesis passage, the Hebrew Bible, that story has over 600 different cultures around the world that date back into ancient times that have their version of those events. And like I say, the Hebrew version is Noah, but then you get into things like as outstanding as like the Gilgamesh epic and things like that. So you've got different casts of characters in all these different cultures that it'd be exhaustive to write a book about it. So I just named a few in my book. This is where you say there is a common thread while every different culture seems to have their own version of events. So did these beings appear to all these different peoples? I think you see it in some of the different cultures. One that's very outstanding for me because of my own roots is the Celtic culture. You've got the Tuatha De Danann, the children of Danu. They were the bright, shining, giant kings of heaven that came down and intermingled with humans and taught them knowledges and things. They are actually synonymous with what became known as the elven folk. So if you think of think into fiction, think of your Tolkien type of elf, the elven folk, and you've got a picture of who the Tuatha De Danann were supposed to be, at least putting a quick visual to it. And they receded into the hollow hills eventually and became known as the Elven. So this is one of the cultures that has a similar story to these giants, and they're even called in the Celtic tradition, they were called the bright shining ones, the shining kings of heaven, the Tuatha. And you start getting into even the Genesis passage, and you find that some of these characters are referred to as the bright shining ones. They relate to Psalm 82, which you have God talking to the divine council and calling them the bright shining princes of heaven. What you have to do with some of these stories, especially in the case which is what I did, I went to the Hebrew Bible and dug out the stuff there and compared it to other things. You have to dig beneath the surface. You have to look at how it compares to other passages. You can't always just take, and sorry Christians and Jews out there, you just can't take the Bible at face value sometimes. Just like anything else, you got to dig and find out what it's really saying.
Now, part of the problem in trying to interpret these sacred texts is that we're looking at English translations. And years ago, I knew of a fellow, Yonah Fortner, a Hebrew scholar who could read 20, 30 different languages. And he was able, obviously, to read as much as possible original texts to come up with his interpretations. So in doing this kind of study, how far could you go back? Did you have to bring in language experts to help you to find out what these things meant? We have Scott Allen Roberts joining us. The book is The Rise and Fall of the Nephilim with Gene and Chris. You're in Paracast.
of searching for great talk radio.
Something more important.
Search no more. We are the GCN Radio Network.
Ray Perkins, a reclusive veteran burned out from the Gulf War, lives tortured by relentless, perplexing nightmares. Nightmares of a horrific battle in deep space and of a mysterious woman suffering in agony for her devastated world. A woman not yet born, calling across centuries to him. Then, a coincidence leads him to his destiny, his chance to alter the universe. Attack of the Rockoids. The former fiction editor for Star Wars and Indiana Jones, Robert Simpson, writes, "The soul of the novel Attack of the Rockoids lies in its heart and passion for building a convincing tale of a love that spans the galaxy. A thrilling story. Attack of the Rockoids is available now. Read a sample chapter and get a special discount off of the cover price at our website, rockoids.com. That's ROCKOIDS.com. Attack of the Rockoids, a novel in the grand science fiction tradition."
Have you ever seen a U.S. postage stamp featuring Abraham Lincoln, Ben Franklin, or George Washington? If you're into stamp collecting, you know it's a fun, affordable hobby. America's leading stamp dealer is the Mystic Stamp Company, and they want you to have their free 140-page color catalog. Go to MysticStampAd.com, the website of the Mystic Stamp Company. Serving stamp collectors since 1923, Mystic Stamp is well known in the industry for its experience, superior customer service, and an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau. Go to MysticStampAd.com to request your free 140-page U.S. stamp color catalog, packed with collecting tips, special offers, color photos, and over 4,600 available stamps. Call 800-433-7811 or go to MysticStampAd.com. That's 800-433-7811 and ask for your free U.S. stamp catalog or MysticStampAd.com. Mystic Stamp Company, America's leading stamp dealer.
Don't answer it.
If fear strikes your heart when the phone rings, knowing it may be another bill collector, it's time for you to call Zero Debt in 90 days. 800-477-9256. Settlements, bankruptcy, and attorneys are not the answer and may end up costing you up to 10 times more than necessary. Listen, if you're already in debt, does it make sense to get buried in another payment plan? Zero Debt in 90 days gets you out of debt in 90 days guaranteed, without a payment plan and without attorneys or going to court. Get the fastest relief from debt on the planet when you call 800-477-9256. If you have debt with the IRS, credit cards, student loans, or a foreclosure, we can help at Zero Debt in 90 days, and we are the only organization to provide written guarantees on the results. Go to ZeroDebtGuaranteed.com. That's ZeroDebtGuaranteed.com. Or call now for free information. 800-477-9256. That's 800-477-9256.
We all know that Berkey Water Purification Systems are the most trusted name in water filtration. As an authorized Berkey dealer for over 6 years and serving thousands of satisfied customers, the Berkey Guy offers amazing specials for Berkey water filtration systems. The Berkey Light systems include a set of self-sterilizing and recleanable black purification elements that purify water by removing chlorine, pathogenic bacteria, cysts, and parasites to non-detectable levels and remove harmful chemicals such as herbicides and pesticides. Order the Berkey Light system today, complete with 2 black Berkey elements for only $231, and the Berkey Guy will ship your order free of charge. With the purchase of a Berkey Light, the Berkey Guy is also offering a set of fluoride and arsenic filters for only $39.99. That's over 30% off the retail price. Call the Berkey Guy at 1-877-886-3653. That's 1-877-886-3653. Or order online at GoBerkey.com. That's GoBerkey.com today.
This is Jacques Vallée. You're listening to the Paracast, the gold standard of paranormal radio.
On the Paracast with Gene and Chris, 120 miles separate, so that we don't scream at each other and pull each other's hair out or hit each other with axes. That's how it works.
Is that like a marriage made in heaven?
Nah, we get along just great. Yeah, he's my bro.
Yeah, I saw The Daughters of Man and was inspired.
That's how it goes.
All right.
Oh, yeah. Scott Allen Roberts joining us. We're talking about his research process. Okay, so how did you take this study of biblical texts? Did you try to go back to the original language studies or what?
Yes. As a matter of fact, now, you mentioned your scholar that you, by name, you said he reads and writes 23 different languages. It's about 22 more languages than I read or write.
And that's probably about 22 and a half more than I do. But Yonah, unfortunately, is no longer with us. I sure wish he was, because he would have been such a wonderful guest on the Paracast. But he left us before the show came to be.
Well, what I have done is refer to people like him. I will go, when I was in seminary and we had to write term papers and all that, and when I was in ministry and we were teaching or preaching and we wanted to relate to the original language, I took ancient Hebrew in seminary. I took ancient Greek. Ask me today if I remember a lick of either of them, and I don't, because I haven't used them much in the last 25 years. So I go to and I try to dig out the source points for people who have either talked about this and write about it from within because it was from the Hebrew Bible. I wanted to go to Jewish scholars, and I wanted to go to Hebrew scholars in Christianity as well. Michael Heiser is a guy that comes out as a name. I quote him a couple of times in my book. I looked at some of his research. I looked at some Jewish scholars. I got them quoted in my book. I didn't memorize their names. And by the way, when I'm doing these interviews, I think, man, I need to reread my book and familiarize myself with some of what I've written.
I know that feeling.
Sure I'm covering all my points. But, so I hailed to people who know the language better than I do. And I wrote a chapter about Elohim. That was, by the way, one of the very first things that caused some of my questioning in my faith, or at least in my practice, was when I came across the name Elohim in the Old Testament. It's the name for God, one of the many names for God used. And in the Hebrew, it's Elohim, and it's used almost 3,000 times in the Old Testament. But never did I have a full understanding of what that word meant, because when you parse it down in the Hebrew, it's just like the word Nephilim. They both have that him ending, which is, in the Hebrew, that is a plural suffix tacked onto a word to pluralize it. And so Elohim, El being the name of God, the E-L, which, by the way, hails back to the Sumerian prior to the Hebrew, you've got the word Elohim, which basically means, in translation, God of many gods or God among many gods. It's a word that is singular and plural at the same time, depending on the context of the words used in the passage around it. And this is the stuff that, and again, I say in my book, I said, your eyes could gloss over when we start talking about the etymology of ancient Hebrew language, but you got to be impassioned about it, because once you start learning this stuff, it's like opening the door in a dark room and letting some light in. When I found out Elohim meant something different than I thought I had been taught that it meant, it started opening up other doors, because you see how Elohim relates to so many of the other characters that are involved in the Nephilim story and the backstory. Going to Hebrew scholars, I have to do that, because it's like I could talk about lung cancer, but I'm not a doctor, so I'd have to refer to what doctors write about it to say anything intelligent about it. To me, if you're going to study a topic like this, you better dig a little bit and know what the hell you're talking about. And if you don't know it firsthand and you're not the scholar, you better refer to sources who do, so you can back up some of your claims.
Of course, I guess the big problem in doing this kind of research is to try to take the words set down by people we regard as amazingly primitive these days and try to interpret what they really meant, how their culture influenced those descriptions, and translate them to the present day. That had to be really, really difficult.
Yeah, that's the hard part. That's even the hard part. If you go to church on Sunday, that's even the hard part in daily practical stuff that ministers try to pull out of the Bible. When the New Testament tells you that a woman shouldn't speak in church, and if she has a question, she has to go home and ask her husband. How does that fly in our churches nowadays? You have to look at it culturally. You have to look at the audience it was written to and the context.
And you have to think how many divorces you'd have if women had to behave that way.
And if I turned to my wife ever in church and said, hey, you asked me at home while you're cooking dinner, I'd probably get a black eye. So
oh boy,
my wife swears like a Randy Sailor, so she would probably add some nice blue language with it.
My wife learned from her mother how to speak proper. Her mother was just a great person. If you crossed her, or anyone crossed a member of her family, or even her family by marriage, she would use the proper words to put them in their place.
Nice.
Yes. Unfortunately, she's no longer with us. Okay, so we look at trying to interpret ancient cultures, what they saw. Now, is it possible there is nothing physical involved? They all were spiritual encounters of some sort.
It's very possible. It's like I say about all of this stuff. There is no proof for any of it. But I compare that to even our science of the day. My first chapter in the book is entitled Science Almighty. And the reason I do that is I want to dig into the scientific aspect, but say it's sometimes you got to kick out the props of some of the things that you think you know, whether it be theology, religion, spirituality, skepticism, or science. You got to kick some of those props out. Because while there is no way to prove that the Nephilim ever even existed, the same thing could be said. You extrapolate that thought over to the evolutionary ascendancy of Homo sapiens. Now, science will tell you that there's a theory of evolution out there. Now, I'm not a creationist, but I am also not a pure evolutionist, because I say this: evolutionary science takes as much exponential leaps of faith to make the connections as it does to say God exists. So we're all operating by a certain modicum of faith. If you have all these different stages of what science has identified as the ascendancy of human evolution, there is still to this day no DNA linkage between any of them. They're still looking for the missing links. And the problem with that is that they put it forth as a solid science when in fact it's a science filled with gaps that take great exponential leaps of faith to fill in the holes.
Well, the other possibility could be in the middle, which is that E.T. came here and he did some genetic engineering, or it did some genetic engineering, and here we are.
That's something I mentioned, too, is that it's kind of, for me, a flip side of the same coin. One side of the coin might say it's all this creation spirituality, and this is all correct. Or you flip the coin over, and you say, now, this is not a new thought nowadays. It was new when I was a kid growing up in the late 60s and the 70s, and that was that thought that, maybe ancient man only perceived as gods, demons, devils, angels, and all of those things in between, things that were nothing of the sort, but just non-human intelligences. But once again, you have no way to prove either of them happened. All we know is we see these quote-unquote evidences. It's like this. You guys are involved in the paranormal as well. I have been as well. You can say to a skeptic or a scientist, I've got this mound of evidence of EVPs and things moving on my tape recorder or my DVR and whatever. None of that is acceptable evidence to anybody who has a scientific or a skeptical mind, because they go by what is the skeptic's credo, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidences. And so anecdotal evidence to a scientist or a skeptic isn't going to cut it. Same thing with this. You can't use the scientific methodology and say to some non-human intelligence in a lab setting and say, okay, you two start procreating, and we're going to do this over and over again until we've proven our hypothesis. You can't do it. It's not there. So what you're using are these old records that, again, span many different cultures to say, now if everybody was writing about a version of this, does that bear some sort of scientific methodology in and of its own? In that you can't prove it happened, but you can show that so many different cultures talked about the same thing, but they didn't talk about the same story. So that means they all had versions of the story. They all had versions of the event, which says there may have been a common event that they were all talking about, or similar events that happened to them all.
Yeah, and this is a cross-cultural tradition as well.
And we'll get into more of that very salient aspect. We're talking to Scott Allen Roberts, with Gene, with Chris. You're in
the Paracast.
The GCN Radio Network, providing the world with hard-hitting talk radio. GCN. Great talk radio starts here.
Graphic Converter is the image manipulation tool for the rest of us. It does not use any database. You get full control of all your files. Want to view the images of a folder? Drag it into Graphic Converter, and a powerful browser opens up to show your image files. You could use it for slideshows. You could use it to import images from digital cameras or from scanners. Need to do some image editing? You can do that too in Graphic Converter. Also print catalogs. Convert from so many formats I can't even list them. Download now to see if Graphic Converter is good for you, like 1.5 million other users. Guess what? You could save money when you buy Graphic Converter. Use the coupon code Night Owl. Use the coupon code Night Owl to get a special price for Graphic Converter. Go to lemkesoft.com. That's LEMKE soft.com. lemkesoft.com. LEMKE soft.com.
That's what it sounds like when a burglar kicks in the door of a dark house that looks like no one is home. Don't let your home be the next target. Make it look like someone is home watching television with Fake TV. Fake TV is a small electronic device that makes the same light as a real television, so from outside it looks like someone is home watching TV. Fake TV plugs in just like a lamp on a timer, but is far more convincing to burglars. Fake TV deters burglars, costs far less than an alarm, and is highly recommended by numerous police departments. Use it anytime you're away from home. To order your Fake TV for only $34.95, go to faketv.com. or call 1-877-5-FAKE-TV. Each additional Fake TV is only $29.95, so get one for you and one for a loved one for safety, security, and peace of mind for both of you. Call 877-5-FAKE-TV or go to faketv.com. faketv.com, the burglar deterrent.
Hi, I'm Mark Craighead, founder of Crossbreed Holsters. I designed our top-selling holster, the Super Tuck Deluxe, to solve the problems of being poked, pinched, and gouged while carrying concealed. The Super Tuck Deluxe is the most comfortable, most concealable holster on the market today. We offer a 2-week free trial and a lifetime warranty.
Visit us at crossbreedholsters.com. Don't forget, crossbreedholsters.com. In a coming-apart world, you need something to keep it tied together. That something is Atwood Rope, the highest quality rope made in the USA, from exotic braids for military, rescue, arborists, shipyards, tow line, or boating. Quality rope at affordable prices you and your customers can depend on. Find a dealer or shop online at atwoodrope.net. Enter promo code RADIO to receive 100 feet of 550 paracord free with purchase. Atwood Rope, working to keep the world tied together.
Digestive health is the key to wellness and elimination of toxins. That bears repeating. Digestive health is the key to wellness and elimination of toxins. And Pro EM1 Daily Probiotic Cleanse is the key to digestive health. Pro EM1 is a powerful liquid probiotic, strong enough to cleanse, gentle enough to use every day. Pro EM1 is dairy, wheat, and soy-free, contains all natural and certified organic ingredients, contains no preservatives or animal products, supports a healthy digestive and immune system, supports weight loss, improves absorption of food nutrients, aids in controlling yeast infections, is never freeze-dried, and uses 3 groups of live, viable, beneficial microbes to cleanse and remove toxins. Order Pro EM1 Daily Probiotic Cleanse at Terraganics.com, spelled TerraGanix.com, Terraganics.com, or call toll-free 866-369-3678. That's 866-369-3678. Pro EM1, the raw probiotic.
Hi, this is Don Ecker, and you are tuned into the Paracast. Let me tell you what, you're going to hear stuff here that you probably won't hear anywhere else. Hear that, George Snorri?
You have Scott Allen Roberts exploring ancient advanced beings with Gene and Chris in the Paracast. As we broke for that important interval, Chris started to frame a question. Chris?
I was going to make the observation, Scotty, that this is not only a Near Eastern or Western tradition. You find stories of giants and interbreeding with humans of some godlike beings all over the world. My good friend Clifford Mahudi is a Zuni elder, and he's mentioned these types of details in some of their mythology, and I think it's indicative of, when you look at so many different cultures coming up with a very similar take on a subject, it's the chances of this being coincidental, I think, are astronomical. There's got to be some sort of truth there at the core somewhere. It may not have survived intact through thousands of years, but it is an indication that this is definitely worthy of study. And the whole Nephilim thing, I don't think we've really defined totally what we're talking about. For some of our our newer listeners, perhaps you should go in and give a little bit more details, especially about the genetic part of this and the interbreeding with humans.
Okay. Well, the source point for the word Nephilim, which, by the way, has become a word that's even crossed over into pop culture. You see movies with Cuba Gooding Jr. about the Nephilim that they unfroze and things like that. So the word has become synonymous with some kind of being that was once an off-breeding or a hybrid breeding with humans. The source point for the word itself, though, is the Hebrew Bible. It's the book of Genesis. You can also find it in one of the apocryphal books, Enoch, which I hail to a lot in my research to establish the theology behind this. You also find it in the book of Jubilees, the book of Jasher, and they're even mentioned in the more recently, if you will, in the last 20 years, uncovered the book of Giants that was part of the Dead Sea Scrolls. So one of the mistranslations of the word was that that Nephilim means giant. It doesn't. There's another word in the passage. You go to Genesis 6, and it talks about, and in those days the sons of God came down and intermingled with the daughters of men and had children by them. They were known as the Nephilim, and the heroes of old and the men of renown. Now, by the way, that term, the men of renown, that phrase in the Hebrew is referring to the Gibborim in Hebrew, in the Hebrew sense of what was going on there. And the Gibborim were known as giants, mighty men of valor. And what you've also got here is something that looks like it's starting to talk about maybe some of our mythologies about the Greek gods and the pantheons of different gods hailed from these sources. The only problem is that Genesis was written long after many of these things existed in different cultures. So the Nephilim are the offspring of, according to Genesis, the sons of God, in the Hebrew, the Bene Ha-Elohim, who came down and intermingled with the daughters of human men and had children by them. And then it says, and the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward. Then it goes into talking about the mortality of man and the number of years he lived, and right directly into the story of Noah. So the connection is not made, in the English version anyway, it's not made very quickly, but there's this hint by the author of Genesis that there was a race that was bequeathed by the mixing of spirit beings of some kind and human women. In my settings where I grew up, we kind of hinted at this at the beginning, I think, Gene, with your question. At the very beginning, when I learned this stuff in seminary, which was very slight, we were taught, well, this is obviously not referring to non-human beings. This has to do with the sons of the prophets or the sons of the wealthy who came down and intermingled with the women of the common folk in the villages. And I said, but why then does the Hebrew make a stark contrast between the Bene Ha-Elohim and the daughters of Adam? They don't use the same term. They don't say that this was the sons of Adam, who were the upper classes or the schools of the prophet, intermingling with the daughters of Adam. They make a contrast between the two. And the purpose for the contrast is to create a stark difference between the two beings. But the author of Genesis, who, by the way, I believe was Moses, and I write about that, and the tradition I think is pretty strong, and there's good grounds for it, talks about these beings almost as an offhand remark. It's almost like, oh yeah, there were these Nephilim, and they were bequeathed by this and that, but now let's talk about the flood. And it's almost an aside. Go to the book of Enoch, however, which is an apocryphal book. It's a book that was booted out of the canon of Scripture by one of Constantine's councils, started in the Council of Nicaea, because they could not decide that there was unanimity on whether or not Enoch was a scriptural book. And but by the way, on the book of Enoch itself, it's quoted by many of the prophets in the Old Testament. Paul and Peter in the New Testament quote from the book of Enoch. Jesus himself quotes from the book of Enoch. Yet the Council of Nicaea and other councils following under Constantine decided it wasn't scripture, even though all those people used it and quoted from it. But in Enoch, you have the same exact passage. It starts with the same language as the Genesis 6 passage. But then it goes, instead of just 4 to 5 verses, it goes into chapter after chapter after chapter about these beings who, the sons of God, the Bene Ha-Elohim, Enoch refers to them as the watchers, who came down to the earth and intermingled with the daughters of men. As a matter of fact, in Enoch it says, they descended to the slopes of Mount Hermon, which is in northern Israel. It's today in the Golan Heights. straddling Syria and Lebanon. And it was there that there were 200 of them, and they made a pact with each other to go into human women. It doesn't say that there were any women versions of them, female versions, and that they went into men too. It just said they went into women, chose any ones that they wanted. They lusted after them. They cohabited with them. They made homes with them. They had offspring, and they taught humans the forbidden knowledges, the knowledges of things like cosmetics, the making of mirrors, the making of weapons, the signs of the sun, moon, and stars, and herbology and things like that. And why those were forbidden, I don't know. But
it sounds like they didn't have a prime directive.
No prime directive.
Okay.
Or they violated the prime directive because, in their midst, Shemyaza in the book of Enoch says, he's one of these prefects of the 200. He says, wait a minute, if we do this, we're going to get our butts kicked. And they don't say by God. They just said, we're going to be in big trouble because we're not supposed to be doing this. And it says all the rest of them just pressed him and said, no, we're doing this anyway. You're either with us or you're without us. And so he joined them. He was their leader, and so he was basically saying, if you guys do this, it's my head on the block. This is the, if you read between the lines and want to put a little common vernacular in it, you're talking about ancient texts again. But in these passages, one of the, by the way, the big misnomers about these beings is for years they were thought to be fallen angels. But never in any of these passages do they use the word Malachi, for angels in the Hebrew. They're always referred to as the sons of God, the Elohim, and things like that. And this is where you can go to Psalm 82 and start seeing a correlation. Different passages in the Bible talk about a group called the Divine Council. And it says in there, and then we talked about Elohim. I'm going to interchange Elohim for where it says God in this passage. In Psalm 82 it says, and Elohim stood, singular, in the midst of the Elohim, same word, plural, and said to them, plural, you are all Elohim, you are the bright shining princes of heaven. Now you take that term, bright shining, and this takes you back even further than the account in Genesis 6, back to creation and the creation family, which just as the flood, you've got every different culture has its own version of a creation story and its own version of a creation couple or creation couples and their offspring being twins or multiple births. And there was always some kind of trickster character that came in and either impregnated the woman or impregnated the daughter of the first couple, and that bequeathed and started all the problems. This relates to Adam and Eve, the Genesis Garden of Eden story, and the serpent in the garden.
So we're not just talking about a racial consciousness or worldwide allegory here. We're talking possibly of a physical event that occurred that was widely reported?
You can't prove that Adam and Eve ever existed. But if they did as two individuals, I think is irrelevant because you're never going to know for sure. But what it does talk about in all these cultures is a first family that had interactions with these beings. In the Genesis account, the point I was trying to make here, remember the bright shining ones. This is what the divine council are called. You have Nakash, the word in the Hebrew for the serpent in the garden. The serpent character is called Nakash. And by definition, it means trickster, bringer of knowledge, illuminator, bright shining one. And this is the one who tempted Eve in the garden. And the whole context of the whole thing in the garden, you got to step back and look at it. Get out of the box. Look at it. While all the verbs and the action nouns in the Hebrew are all fairly neutral and generic terms, like he gave, he offered, she took, she ate, she gave to Adam, he took, he ate. But the whole context is one that's sexual in nature. And it talks about after the fall, when God's cursing everybody, he says about the serpent, he says, and there will be enmity between the seed of the serpent and the seed of the woman.
We'll get into more of this with Scott Allen Roberts, with Gene and Chris. You're in
the Paracast.
America's #1 source for independent talk radio for over a decade. We are the GCN Radio Network.
Hi, Ted Anderson announcing a great way to listen to radio on the telephone. By calling 760-569-7700, you'll be hearing GCNlive.com programs in seconds. Come to GCNlive.com, find your favorite host's dedicated phone number, and hear them 24/7. You heard me right. Every show has a dedicated phone number. Stop by GCNlive.com and bookmark their number today. And again, that's 760-569-7700. We the People grow cotton, weave fabric, engrave ink, embed strips and fibers to protect from counterfeit and carting to a private bank, having it led back at interest, forcing taxes to service debt. This capitalism, or was Jefferson correct when stating a central bank issuing the public currency is a greater menace to the liberties of the people than a standing army? Ted Anderson, I'm placing a free silver dollar in a book that explains our monetary system. Call for your copy, 800-686-2237. It's time to understand the system. Call 800-686-2237. That's 800-686-2237.
Welcome back to the Paracast, the gold standard of paranormal radio. And now, here's Gene Steinberg.
With Gene and Chris in the Paracast, Scott Allen Roberts is talking about things that happened in ancient times. So can we interpret this as Earth being visited by E.T. doing something, whether violating the Prime Directive or following up on a civilization that was seeded by them, manipulating our past? And then the question is about the trickster. Do we think of maybe there's another political faction there, it doesn't agree with the prevailing wisdom, and they came out and they tried to change things?
I think to answer the first question, maybe. Because, once again, we don't know for sure. There's no way to prove any of this actually happened. All you've got, again, is all these different texts that talk about similar events. So something I put forward in my book, I at the time I wrote this, I said, the jury is still out for me on the whole ancient alien impregnation, DNA manipulation thing. I said, I've not studied it enough. I'm not thorough on that topic. I see a lot of the evidences that are put forward. So let's say this, from a theological standpoint, you can look at this and say it happened this way, or it may have happened this way. It may have been ancient mankind extrapolating spiritual and divine terms and putting them on these beings.
And it wasn't just a science fiction novel.
Wasn't just a science fiction novel, did you say?
Yeah, it wasn't just a science fiction novel. They didn't write science fiction in those days, did they?
No. As a matter of fact, I have a problem with the notion that skeptics and scientists and atheists and all will say, well, that's just religious texts. It's a book of faith. Well, you know what? History and religion were not separated the way we separate them now. When we say that, we're thinking within our cultural context. We're thinking within our society here in the United States. We go
separation of church and state, which is now a big argument in the political world.
Exactly. That's hot today with some of the candidates that are out there right now. Again, and it's hot in every issue. The problem with that is when we view ancient writings through the filter of what we believe or how we act nowadays, or the way our society believes, we are forgetting the context that those passages were all written in. These were not meant to be, here is your book of faith, by the way, is separate from your books of the law and your books of your history and so on. They weren't separated back then. The big question is, were they right? We don't know. There's no way to know for sure. That's why this is still a curiosity. This is the stuff that draws our attention, because there's something there that's either encoded or it's skipped over, or we don't see its import because we are not part of that society that saw and viewed things the way they saw and viewed them. So this whole topic, and I'm speaking from within the Hebrew Bible because this is where I did most of my study and research for this book. You've got a society that was a theocratic society. They believed that God ruled them, and their writers and their leaders all tried to establish this. I talked about Moses earlier. I have a chapter in the book called Moses, the Pharaoh God of Israel. If you start digging historically, and this is by way of illustration of this very same point, we can say Moses, and everybody goes, how do we know Moses really wrote that? And to me, I come back and I say, Homer wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey? How do we know that? We don't know Homer really existed.
We don't know that, for example, Shakespeare wrote his plays.
Yeah, by the way, I just watched the movie Anonymous. I don't know if I agree with it all. I love Shakespeare, and I consider myself a pseudo-Shakespeare scholar, and I've always liked Shakespeare, and I believe he wrote most of his works. But there are people who believe even as early as 400 years ago, they don't know if the guy wrote all his own stuff.
Let me raise that question here, though. And that is here, we have all these ancient texts, and obviously there had to be a committee of people who would take this stuff and they'd edit it, possibly centuries after the events occurred, and then decide whether to include them or not. You have this, we call them today an editorial committee. They would make final decisions on what you could read. So we don't know how much they manipulated what you see there and how it changed from the original reports, do you?
No, we don't. As a matter of fact, for this book, I talked to a good friend of mine, Dr. John Ward. He is an archaeologist, anthropologist on the ground in Luxor for about the last 10 years. And he does a lot of study. And I was asking him about Moses and the Exodus and all of that. And he has a different version than I believe. I dated Moses in this book for a certain reason. I wanted to establish what he would have experienced as an Egyptian, growing up for the first 40 years of his life, if the Bible is to be believed on that story. What did he experience? What did he bring to the table when he mentioned the Nephilim? And why did he treat them and handle them the way he did? And this is a bit of a rabbit trail, but I think it establishes this point. You can look at the Bible, and in 1 Kings 6, verse 1, it talks about the establishment or the dedication of Temple 1 in Jerusalem. It's known as Temple 1. It's Solomon's temple. Now, there's disputes over whether even Solomon existed or not, but they can't dispute the temple because there's archaeological and historical evidence for Temple 1. And all of your scholars, be they biblical scholars or be they secular scholars, they will agree on one thing. The temple in Jerusalem, Temple 1, was established and dedicated right around 966 BC. Give or take 4 to 6 years in either direction, depending on what you're looking at. Now, in that text in 1 Kings, it says, and in the 480th year after the first Passover, the Exodus under Moses, the coming out of Egypt of the children of Israel, Solomon dedicated his temple. So you've got, if you do your math, you roughly get 1446 BC as the date of the Exodus. Then you start doing your math. If Moses was indeed 80 years old when he came back and led the Exodus, you go back 40 years, and then another 40 years to his birth. You get right around 1526 BC, and you start looking at the pharaohs. Pharaoh Tutmosis the first, Tutmosis the second, Tutmosis the third. The woman that I think raised Moses was a woman by the name of Hatshepsut, who was the daughter of the pharaoh at the time. And you start digging out all these different facts historically, and you can say, this is a religious book about Moses, and Moses, by the way, was not real big on establishing dates. He didn't say, and in this year, by the Hebrew calendar, I did this. He doesn't even give the names of the kings. He just says the Pharaoh, Pharaoh's daughter, this guy, that guy. So to him, it wasn't an important thing. What was important to him was that he was establishing his leadership over Israel. And I believe that Moses was about as Egyptian as an Egyptian can be. If he was raised in the palace of 18th dynasty Egypt for the first 40 years of his life, this is what he was, and this is what he brought to the table.
So he was a politician.
He was a politician.
Okay, now here's what I worry about also about ancient texts, and this is something I've said on the Paracast from time to time. We cannot agree with 24/7 cable TV what happened 3 hours ago in another state, or what a politician said and what he meant. We can't agree on that. We argue over that point, and now we're trying to take something written a couple of thousand years ago, trying to interpret stuff that happened hundreds of years earlier. How do we know what's accurate and what isn't?
I think the beauty of going to ancient texts rather than CNN, NBC, and all those places is that nowadays you've got a million different sources. Back then, there was the simplicity of a simple history being written. Now, was there controversy? Hell yeah. You look at the New Testament. You had Peter, the great fisherman, the disciple of Jesus, who they say traditionally was the guy who established the Roman Catholic Church. Then you've got Paul, the apostle, who wrote 2/3 of the New Testament, the apologist for establishing the Christian faith. These two guys were at odds with each other right from the get-go. So from the very beginning of the Christian faith, you had the first big church schism was between two of the huge leaders of the Christian faith. And they couldn't agree on, was salvation open to the Jews or was it closed to the Jews, and no Gentiles allowed, things like that. And Paul even writes about it in his books, and Peter and I got into a big fisticuff about this. all that just illustrating the fact that even back then, in the establishment of these things, you had people fighting over what it meant and who it was for. So yeah, all of these ancient writings, you look back at stuff that Moses wrote, and you say, how do we know that's what really happened? Well, I don't think we do. I think you have to weed out the history. This is where science, I think, and skepticism are very handy tools.
And very sophisticated guesswork, I suppose. Scott Allen Roberts joining us with Gene and Chris. You're in
the Paracast.
So here's what happened. I was placing an order online. The site went down. It just stopped responding. It took hours before it returned, but I'd already placed the order with another company. If your site goes down, you could lose business. And if you have a business or personal site, you'll want to know it's easy to run and it will stay online. At iWeb, your site is hosted on one of the most reliable networks in the world. Check it out. iWeb.com. That's iWeb.com.
You expect professional service from your doctor, your accountant, and even the girl who takes your morning coffee order. Why not from your domain registrar, too? Namecheap.com provides stellar service with no sneaky upselling. We offer more features and security options for your website than there are ways to order a latte. And new domains come with a WhoIsGuard to protect your personal info. At Namecheap.com, you can get your domain for as low as $2.99. Now is a great time to get to know Namecheap.com.
IRS, the three most dreaded letters of the alphabet. If you owe back taxes, have unfiled tax returns, are receiving threatening letters, or have IRS agents coming to your home or place of business, you need an experienced IRS agent fighting on your side. Call the Tax Relief Division of the Law Offices of Craig Zimmerman at 800-342-8068. Spearheaded by a former IRS agent, we know how to negotiate a reduction in the tax you owe, stop wage garnishments, lift bank levies, and negotiate an affordable repayment plan. With 17 years as a practicing attorney and an A-plus Better Business rating, we'll get the IRS off your back once and for all. In fact, recently, when an IRS employee had a tax problem, she called us. Stop being afraid and call right now for your free consultation at 800-342-8068. The phone call is free and there's no obligation, so call 800-342-8068. Again, that's 800-342-8068. Actual results based on individual client circumstances.
What if pain could be reduced, ailments could be alleviated, physical and mental stress could be eased, and blood circulation increased, all by simply lying down? Introducing the original Biomat. The Biomat is an FDA-registered medical device that combines deep-penetrating infrared space-age technology and revitalizing negative ions with the incredible healing power of amethyst crystals. A Biomat can boost your immune system, relieve pain and stiffness, reduce stress and fatigue, and assists in detoxifying your body. Join the thousands of people reporting relief from chronic pain, fibromyalgia, arthritis, sports injuries, insomnia, and much more. Each Biomat comes with a lifetime trade-in and 3-year warranty. Learn more at bio-mats.com, spelled bio-mats.com, or call 360-944-8692. That's 360-944-8692. Visit bio-mats.com today and enhance your life with a Biomat.
Do you suffer from low-functioning adrenal or thyroid? Did you know that mercury from your dental fillings comes off of your teeth both as a vapor and as particles into your body? Wherever mercury deposits in your body, it stops cells from functioning normally. Animal studies show that mercury causes kidney function to drop by 60%. Mercury deposited into your adrenals or thyroid will cause a corresponding drop in function. The number one method by which your body detoxifies itself of mercury is glutathione. The number one superfood that helps turn on all 10 trillion cells of your body to produce glutathione is non-denatured whey protein from grass-fed cows. After investigating most high-end whey proteins on the market, only one is the most non-denatured, the most active, the most complete, and in our opinion, the most powerful in what nature originally put into the fresh raw whey. It is One World Whey. Call 888-988-3325. That's 888-988-3325. Or visit oneworldwhey.com. That's oneworld.com.
We'd like to hear from you. If you have a comment or question about the Paracast, send it to news@theparacast.com. That's news@theparacast.com. And if you'd like to catch up on past episodes, we have hundreds of shows for you to download, direct from theparacast.com. That's theparacast.com. Or check us out at iTunes.
Scott Allen Roberts joining us. We're checking ancient history, and we're trying to ferret out the facts from the fiction, from the fancy, from the political agendas. I guess it's difficult. I guess in the end, what you have to do is make a good guess. Isn't that right?
That's pretty much it. You're making educated guesses. And I think, scientists will bristle at that, but I think that's what we do in science. There are some things we can establish. We can establish earthly things pretty easily. We know what oxygen is made out of. That's pretty established. Where it came from and how it came to be, we can hypothesize. You start getting into these realms that are what I would call the whack fringe of normal, and you start getting the big questions, and this is why I think the scientific community eschews this kind of stuff. They don't want to be part of it.
Okay, let's leave that to the churches to figure out. We don't want to bother, but I'm going to have another question here because we've touched on it for almost half the show now, and that is the flood, Noah, all this stuff. We assume then this was some kind of worldwide cataclysm that maybe generated all this chatter, all this literature?
Well, yes, in short. To start digging into it, we were always taught in my theological circles that it was a universal flood, that the flood covered all the highest mountain peaks, and then with this ark that Noah built, it came to rest as the waters receded in the mountains of Urartu, or Ararat. It never says Mount Ararat. It says the mountains of Urartu. And, of course, there's little bits and pieces of evidence you can find. I'm going to make that analogy again, too, to like the paranormal. We get little bits and pieces of things that we can start to build a case, but it doesn't really prove anything for anybody that's at least of a scientific mind. So there's little bits and pieces you can put together about the flood and Noah and things like that. What you do know is, geologically speaking, there was some great catastrophic flood that covered the earth. Now, they don't know, was this a big flood? Or was this the receding of the Ice Age? Was this like the Persian Gulf right now? They say down near the base of the northwest of the Persian Gulf, where you find the big cities in Iraq, that part of the Persian Gulf was once dry land, and miles out into the Persian Gulf where they can find settlements and things. As a matter of fact, this is one of the places where they postulate Eden existed, and it's now buried in the waters of the Persian Gulf. So you've got all kinds of things that you can look at and say, I can surmise that this happened this way, or I can guess, educated guesswork that this happened this way, but you can't base it strictly in theology. You got to look at the theology and filter it through science, filter it through history, filter it through geology. Did a major flood take place in the Mesopotamian Euphrates River Valley, the river valley, the Tigris and Euphrates? Yeah. There's a lot of evidence that happened there. Was it any more universal than that? We don't know for sure. It said it covered all the world. Did that mean all the known world? Did that mean all of the earth, the globe, the parts of the globe they didn't even know about? I don't know.
We do have traditions in the oral tradition of some of our indigenous cultures around the world. They all share similar versions of the flood myth, and you've brought up an interesting part of the world. And of course, anytime you start talking about Iran, Iraq, and that area, you get into the ancient Mesopotamian cultures between the Tigris and Euphrates, which brings us to our dear departed Zecharia Sitchin. Sitchin has an interesting take on the Nephilim, and he ties them to this Planet X, Nibiru. And where do you come down on Sitchin's work in regards to...
Let me tell you this, to be very honest. I have avoided reading Sitchin's work as I've been doing my study on this because, first of all, there are things that I've read about Sitchin's work, and there are portions of Sitchin's work I've read for the purpose of studying what he had to say about certain things. I found that without condemning the man outright, which I don't do, he's obviously put a lot of time and research into his work, or did, I should say. There were mistranslations of some of the ancient Sumerian language that he used. And you'll find this in Michael Heiser's work. What's his big website? SitchinIsWrong.com or something like that. And he takes him to task because he said Sitchin was not a Hebrew scholar or an ancient linguist, but he went in, like I'm doing, he's going in and relying on other people's study. And for me, I have to pick and choose who I think is the guy that's translating that stuff the best. I like Heiser because he's got no bones approach about it. He says, look, this is what the language says and this is what it means. Sitchin was trying to squeeze some things to fit into his theory. And his theory is not a bad theory. It's just like any of this other stuff, though. There's no way to prove it. And so what I found about his work in general, without having read it, I would say Sitchin puts forth a theory of how he thinks this all took place and who he thinks these beings are. But if he's heavily relying on his theories of Nibiru, his theories of a race coming to enslave humanity, and he builds that whole thing about Eden, the Eden area. He builds his case with the Anunnaki. He builds his case with the ancient Sumerian culture. And I can see where he pulls his facts, quote, unquote, from, but are his conclusions correct? I don't know for sure. Maybe he is right on the mark. But when he mistranslates a few words in there and kind of squeezes them to fit, it's not that they don't fit, it's that he kind of squeezes them a bit.
In what respect does he do that? Scott.
Oh, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Sure. Scott, in what respect does he twist or mistranslate things?
Well, it's one word in particular that he makes a real point of emphasizing in the 12th Planet, and that's the word Shem, which he retranslated to mean rocket. That was the biggie. Are there other ones?
Right. Well, like the land of Sumer. He translates that as the land of the Watchers. Now, he might not be totally off on that, but that's not a direct translation of the word. That's his extrapolation of his theories brought into that. This is because this and this and this mean this. This has got to mean this. That's kind of what he's doing in some of his translation work. And I don't think his translation work is the hinge pin to either disassemble him or to lend him credence. I'm just saying that I don't think his scholarship on some of the language that he used was as thorough as it could have been. And if it was, he may have had to stretch his theories a little bit more than he does. So, like you say, with the word Shem meaning rocket, that's something that's a stretch for me, because I don't think they knew what a rocket was, and Shem wasn't a word for rocket. So it might have been a word for something that you could extrapolate a meaning and say, well, they must have thought it meant this.
Okay, I'll ask you that question, Scotty, and that is, okay, if you wanted to describe a rocket 2,500 years ago, how would you do it?
I might say a wheel within a wheel within a wheel. I don't know.
Okay.
How would you describe a rocket? You look at all the talk of the presence of God that would come down, the pillar of fire by night, the pillar of cloud by day. I think what you've got there is you've got people that were not that technologically advanced trying to describe things that may have been much more technologically advanced than we can even describe. So I think you've got a lot of stuff in there that it's way open for interpretation because we don't know exactly what they saw. All we can do is say, this doesn't sound like this. And if you take the measurements or the way this thing works, especially the Ezekiel thing, the wheel within a wheel within a wheel, and you can start looking at the way this thing is described and say, wait, that sounds like a gyroscope. That sounds like this. That sounds like that.
That sounds like a UFO, for example. Scott Allen Roberts joining us with Gene and Chris. You're in
the Paracast.
Are you tired of searching for great talk radio?
Something more important.
Search no more. We are the GCN Radio Network.
Ray Perkins, a reclusive veteran burned out from the Gulf War, lives tortured by relentless, perplexing nightmares. Nightmares of a horrific battle in deep space and of a mysterious woman suffering in agony for her devastated world. A woman not yet born, calling across centuries to him. Then, a coincidence leads him to his destiny, his chance to alter the universe. Attack of the Rockoids. The former fiction editor for Star Wars and Indiana Jones, Robert Simpson, writes, "The soul of the novel Attack of the Rockoids lies in its heart and passion for building a convincing tale of a love that spans the galaxy. A thrilling story. Attack of the Rockoids is available now. Read a sample chapter and get a special discount off of the cover price at our website, rockoids.com. That's ROCKOIDS.com. Attack of the Rockoids, a novel in the grand science fiction tradition.
Have you ever seen a U.S. postage stamp featuring Abraham Lincoln, Ben Franklin, or George Washington? If you're into stamp collecting, you know it's a fun, affordable hobby. America's leading stamp dealer is the Mystic Stamp Company, and they want you to have their free 140-page color catalog. Go to MysticStampAd.com, the website of the Mystic Stamp Company, serving stamp collectors since 1923. Mystic Stamp is well known in the industry for its experience, superior customer service, and an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau. Go to MysticStampAd.com to request your free 140-page U.S. stamp color catalog, packed with collecting tips, special offers, color photos, and over 4,600 available stamps. Call 800-433-7811 or go to MysticStampAd.com. That's 800-433-7811 and ask for your free U.S. stamp catalog or MysticStampAd.com. Mystic Stamp Company, America's leading stamp dealer.
Don't answer it.
If fear strikes your heart when the phone rings, knowing it may be another bill collector, it's time for you to call Zero Debt in 90 days. 800-477-9256. Settlements, bankruptcy, and attorneys are not the answer and may end up costing you up to 10 times more than necessary. Listen, if you're already in debt, does it make sense to get buried in another payment plan? Zero Debt in 90 days gets you out of debt in 90 days guaranteed, without a payment plan and without attorneys or going to court. Get the fastest relief from debt on the planet when you call 800-477-9256. If you have debt with the IRS, credit cards, student loans, or a foreclosure, we can help at Zero Debt in 90 days, and we are the only organization to provide written guarantees on the results. Go to ZeroDebtGuaranteed.com. That's ZeroDebtGuaranteed.com. Or call now for free information. 800-477-9256. That's 800-477-9256.
We all know that Berkey water purification systems are the most trusted name in water filtration. As an authorized Berkey dealer for over 6 years and serving thousands of satisfied customers, the Berkey Guy offers amazing specials for Berkey water filtration systems. The Berkey Light systems include a set of self-sterilizing and recleanable black purification elements that purify water by removing chlorine, pathogenic bacteria, cysts, and parasites to non-detectable levels and remove harmful chemicals such as herbicides and pesticides. Order the Berkey Light system today, complete with 2 black Berkey elements for only $231, and the Berkey Guy will ship your order free of charge. With the purchase of a Berkey Light, the Berkey Guy is also offering a set of fluoride and arsenic filters for only $39.99. That's over 30% off the retail price. Call the Berkey Guy at 1-877-886-3653. That's 1-877-886-3653. Or order online at GoBerkey.com. That's GoBerkey.com today.
This is Leslie Kane, and I'm with the Coalition for Freedom of Information, and you are listening to the Paracast.
With Gene and Chris on the Paracast with Scott Allen Roberts, trying to make sense of ancient history about varying interpretations, trying to figure out what happened and whether E.T. came here and E.T. intermingled with us, E.T.
found the
seeded
daughters
us.
of man fair.
Yeah. Now, the other thing, of course, is that if there was this sort of flood, would it be a catastrophic weather event? Would it be a typhoon, or would it be some sort of global catastrophe? Can we unearth that, Scotty?
What we have found, and again, what we have surmised, at least within theology, it says it rained 40 days and 40 nights. That's the story of the flood that we all took from Sunday school. What we don't always focus on is the other little tidbits it says about this flood. It says, and the window. It says it rained, and it said also that the windows of heaven were opened. It said also the fountains of the deep were broken open. And I remember when I was in a Baptist youth group as a kid, we were touring some big cave down south here somewhere, and our youth pastor was saying, now see, this is an obvious remnant of the fountains of the deep having been broken open. Now, that's what he said. He didn't give us any geological facts about that. But when you look at the story of Genesis, just like everything in Genesis that talks about these stories that I would collectively call creation myths, flood myths, not to, again, offend anybody's religious sensibilities, but let's put it all in the camp of the great mythos of all these things. you've got certain things that are said in Genesis that are obviously deeper than what they say on the surface. And you can find that by just the way Moses treated historical characters. He doesn't get into it, but he says things poetically. He says things metaphorically. He says things in encoded allegorical types of messages. And so this flood, if it was a catastrophic flood, according to this, it rained 40 days and 40 nights, but they were on the ark for another, I think it was a total of 120 days before the waters receded enough to come out. Is this something that, is it poetic language talking about the receding of ice age, of glaciers? Is it a mixture of floodplains overflooding, of great rains, of a great flood period? We don't know for sure. That's the problem, is that all these cultures speak of a flood. Even here in the United States, our Native American cultures have their stories of floods, but they also didn't live here back then. They're carrying these stories from their ancestors who migrated here from other parts of the world. So
I think some of the Native Americans might take exception. I know the Zuni and Hopi do.
And I know you'll talk to the Lakota, too, and say, the Black Hills are the center of the earth, and this is where the people have always been. And which, by the way, there's a great story I mentioned from the Lakota about creation and Adam and Eve and the trickster and so on. They've got their own version of that. Iktopi is their trickster character. But they all have these versions. The problem we all have, guys, is that you don't know which one is true. And are they all true, just variations of the same thing? You can say geologically, geologists have proven that, even the Rocky Mountains were at one time underwater. But is that upsurge of tectonic plates, and it was once under the ocean, and that's why you can find seashells on the top of the mountains in the Rockies? Or is it sea sediment, fossilized sea sediment? Did that come from the fact that this was prior to the tectonic plates shifting and the separation of the continent, the continental drift? I don't know. Or is it referring to a great flood? The thing is, you can study all this stuff out and never come up with the answer that says conclusively, oh yeah, it was one big catastrophic flood that happened over a 120-day period. There's just no way to prove that.
Wouldn't there be some archaeological evidence that one can unearth?
Sure, there's all kinds of evidence. When they find complete villages that are submerged in lakes and submerged in oceans that date back thousands of years. They even look at Göbekli Tepe, which, by the way, I say that a lot, by the way. I don't know why. It's a habit of phrase. But the Sumerian culture was once thought to be the oldest culture on the face of the earth, the civilization, dating back to 45 to 4800 BC. That's where we have our first cuneiform writing and the first advance of civilization, so to speak. Yet they have dated now Göbekli Tepe in the last few years back to 12,000 BC, another 8,000 years, 7,500 years further back. And this is where they found all those circular temples, this series of circular temples, all meticulously buried in the dirt, and earmarks of having been buried by hand, not buried by silt and erosion and things like that. And they found them in perfect form. And on all these temples are all these great carvings of humans on these monoliths and animals, some animals unrecognizable. And so the question is this something that relates back to the flood or pre-flood? We don't know. We don't know for sure. And it's trying to grab all this stuff. You can look at history, archaeology, anthropology, but then you got to say it all inevitably leads back to somebody saying, how does this tie into these biblical events and these great religious events that we talk about? It's still on the cusp of everybody's tongue, even if they don't believe it. This proves there was a great flood, or this doesn't prove that there was a great flood. Things like that. So all you can do is look at this stuff, and you start tying the bits and pieces together, as opposed to say, I have this thread of great facts that proves this and this and this happened. You just don't.
So in the end, what do you really do here? How do you find out what really happened then? We have so many fascinating possibilities, and we're going to cover more as we proceed, especially the fall of the Nephilim, what that means. How can we go about proving any of this?
I think what you do, and this is what I have done, is I say, I came out of a faith that believed all this stuff carte blanche. And so part of my starting point in all of this was saying, I want to know if this stuff is real, so I'm going to dig a little bit. And what I have done with this book is just dig into the theology behind it all and say, look, the theology starts to make sense. And when you can start making sense of the theology and say there's a bigger picture here than we were presented, even in our synagogues and our churches, if that bigger picture starts to materialize, you can say, now maybe that means there's a much bigger picture scientifically. When I start to relate it to ancient aliens or UFOs or ancient star civilizations seeding ours and manipulating our DNA, that is just a version of events. It's a version to explain it. And something I want to be very careful when I do this to not do is this, and that is say, I just want to disprove that the Bible is true or that religion is true. I want to find a different explanation. I think that's the mistake a lot of people make, and it's made on both sides of the camp. You got some people that will say, I want to prove that Jehovah is God and that all these events of the Bible are true, and so they filter everything through that. And if the facts don't fit, they say something's missing here because we just don't have all the facts, but I know it's exactly as the Bible said. The other side of the coin is saying, I don't believe God existed at all. And I believe man made all this stuff up, so how do we make these things fit to make sure that we show that it has nothing to do with God and religion? And I think this is the rock and the hard place we're caught between with this. As much as I can theorize, or anybody else, the hundreds of books that have been written about the Nephilim before I wrote my book, I'm just throwing another apple on the cart to say this is my understanding of this passage and how it works theologically. And when you set up the whole picture, you can see a huge theological picture which says there's something to this story. Now I can take that and I can move it out into the rest of the world and say, how does it compare to everything else out there? How does it compare to our geology? How does it compare to our science? Do these things actually fit? And then the big questions left are, whatever happened, if it was a god that was involved or if it was a race from somewhere else that's involved, they're both things we have no way to know for sure that they actually happened other than our scant evidences. And so we have to, it's almost like you got to choose a side and say, I'm going to be on this side and say that I think it's this, and I'm going to start filtering all my information through this side. And I think your really honest people on either side of this coin are going to be people that say, I don't know which one it was.
And I'll tell you what, we'll continue to explore what might have happened with Scott Allen Roberts. With Gene and Chris, you're in
the Paracast.
The GCN Radio Network, providing the world with hard-hitting talk radio. GCN. Great talk radio starts here.
Graphic Converter is the image manipulation tool for the rest of us. It does not use any database. You get full control of all your files. Want to view the images of a folder? Drag it into Graphic Converter, and a powerful browser opens up to show your image files. You could use it for slideshows. You could use it to import images from digital cameras or from scanners. Need to do some image editing? You can do that too in Graphic Converter. Also print catalogs. Convert from so many formats I can't even list them. Download now to see if Graphic Converter is good for you, like 1.5 million other users. Guess what? You could save money when you buy Graphic Converter. Use the coupon code Night Owl. Use the coupon code Night Owl to get a special price for Graphic Converter. Go to lemkesoft.com. That's Lemke soft.com. Lemkesoft.com. Lemke soft.com.
That's what it sounds like when a burglar kicks in the door of a dark house that looks like no one is home. Don't let your home be the next target. Make it look like someone is home watching television with Fake TV. Fake TV is a small electronic device that makes the same light as a real television. So from outside, it looks like someone is home watching TV. Fake TV plugs in just like a lamp on a timer, but is far more convincing to burglars. Fake TV deters burglars, costs far less than an alarm, and is highly recommended by numerous police departments. Use it anytime you're away from home. To order your Fake TV for only $34.95, go to faketv.com. Or call 1-877-5-FAKE-TV. Each additional Fake TV is only $29.95, so get one for you and one for a loved one for safety, security, and peace of mind for both of you. Call 877-5-FAKE-TV or go to faketv.com. faketv.com. the burglar deterrent.
Hi, I'm Mark Craighead, founder of Crossbreed Holsters. I designed our top-selling holster, the Super Tuck Deluxe, to solve the problems of being poked, pinched, and gouged while carrying concealed. The Super Tuck Deluxe is the most comfortable, most concealable holster on the market today. We offer a 2-week free trial and a lifetime warranty.
Visit us at crossbreedholsters.com. Don't forget, crossbreedholsters.com. In a coming-apart world, you need something to keep it tied together. That something is Atwood Rope, the highest quality rope made in the USA, from exotic braids for military, rescue, arborists, shipyards, tow line, or boating. Quality rope at affordable prices you and your customers can depend on. Find a dealer or shop online at atwoodrope.net. Enter promo code RADIO to receive 100 feet of 550 paracord free with purchase. Atwood Rope, working to keep the world tied together.
Digestive health is the key to wellness and elimination of toxins. That bears repeating. Digestive health is the key to wellness and elimination of toxins. And Pro EM1 Daily Probiotic Cleanse is the key to digestive health. Pro EM1 is a powerful liquid probiotic, strong enough to cleanse, gentle enough to use every day. Pro EM1 is dairy, wheat, and soy free, contains all natural and certified organic ingredients, contains no preservatives or animal products, supports a healthy digestive and immune system, supports weight loss, improves absorption of food nutrients, aids in controlling yeast infections, is never freeze-dried, and uses 3 groups of live, viable, beneficial microbes to cleanse and remove toxins. Order Pro EM1 Daily Probiotic Cleanse at Terraganics.com, spelled TerraGanix.com, Terraganics.com, or call toll-free 866-369-3678. That's 866-369-3678. Pro EM1, the raw probiotic.
This is Kurt Sutton, the author of UFO Mysteries, and you're listening to the Paracast.
Scott Allen Roberts, the book is The Rise and Fall of the Nephilim, with Gene and Chris in the Paracast. You talk about the fall of these advanced beings. What are you referring to? Did we catch them at their own game?
Here's what I saw theologically, is that according to the Book of Enoch, these beings that were bequeathed by the Bene Ha-Elohim, the Watchers, and the intermingling with human women, that it bequeathed the race that were known as giants. They were also known as being very corrupt, and that it was them that corrupted mankind. They brought some great wickedness to mankind. And this is the thing. In the Genesis passage, when God is talking about, this is where I talk about the encoded words and the encoded subtexts. What we learned about Noah and the ark was God was disappointed with the wickedness of man, so he chose to destroy all of mankind with a great flood, and he chose the one righteous man and his family to build an ark and house the animals and so on. We know the story from there. What you've got when you start digging into the Hebrew and relate it to the story of the Nephilim, you find out that it is a God that is angry with the race that has been created, and he is going to wipe out that race, and all of humanity was corrupted and became wicked because of their deeds, and there was not a single family that was pure-blooded human anymore other than Noah's family. When it says in the English, and God said that Noah was a righteous man and upstanding in all his ways, in the Hebrew, it says he was a pure-blooded man, pure in all his generations. And you say, now wait a minute, what does that
sounds racial
mean?
to me.
It does sound racial.
Sure.
God is one of the biggest racists, if you will, in the Bible. Well, look at his chosen people. Look at the way he did things with his people. Look at how he had people wipe other people out. You even go to King David. You're talking thousands of years later. David goes into villages and wipes them out in the name of God and to cover his ass. And so
that's been going on ever since, too.
Yeah, it has. And this is one interesting thing about David, I say. You look at this guy, and this is Goliath comes into this, by the way, in talking about the Nephilim. David, you got to remember, look at your extreme Middle Eastern despots nowadays and how they act and how their people are treated and so on, the ruling classes. Take that back a few thousand years. Before you had what we refer to as modern civilization and the temperance of modern society on them and modern cultures and mores. You've got in King David, a guy that was, I read between the texts of that, and this guy was not a nice man. And even though the Bible calls him the man after God's own heart, the sweet psalmist of Israel, he did some pretty dastardly things. He committed genocide on, genocide would be a race. He committed wiped out certain villages and towns to cover his tracks. And that was the only reason he did it. He was a murderer and all these things. But it starts with that story of David and Goliath. And Goliath is he's even referred to in other parts of the Old Testament. Goliath and his three brothers who lived in Gath in the Philistine territory, it said that they were the children of Anak, the Nephilim.
Boy, I'll tell you, if David was alive today, he's not the kind of guy that you'd want over trying to negotiate a peaceful settlement between the Palestinians and the Israelis.
No, as a matter of fact, there's a passage where it says David, when he's running from the wrath of King Saul, he leaves with nothing but the clothes on his back, and he comes to the town of Nob, where the high priests and the priestly caste lived. And it said, and the high priest Abimelech ran out to meet David and fell to his knees in fear and said, with his head bowed, his hands up, said, "What do you have to do with us, David, son of Jesse?" And he's afraid of David. And David says, "Get up." He says, "I need the sword of Goliath that's been in your keeping," and so on. You know the story. This guy was afraid of David. He was the captain of the king's bodyguard, and he was known to be anointed by the prophet of Israel to be the next king. And this guy was nobody to trifle with. This was a guy who, you almost see the mob in a way. There was a story where there's this rich guy, Nabal, I think was his name, and he had this gorgeous wife, Abigail. And David and his men would protect his sheep, and then he'd come to get food for his men in payment, and he says, "I never hired you." And so they're going to kill Nabal and wipe out his whole family. I mean, what does that sound like? "Hey, you got a nice little shop here on the strip. We want our $1,000 a month or we'll shut you down."
Okay, this is the early mafia. This is the early version of the mafia, huh?
It was, oy vey. So,
yeah, oy vey.
But this is the story of these, and by mentioning of this, I'm trying to also illustrate the point that there is so much subtext to what we read in the Scripture. You got to dig and look between the lines to find the real stories.
Ever since I was quite young in reading the Bible, are these really interesting references to the lifespans of people like Methuselah and Enoch and some of the Old Testament, I guess, founding fathers, if you will. Is there a possibility that some sort of genetic manipulation allowed for these incredible lifespans of hundreds of years? You would think that a mention like that, it's just, to me, it's so casual the way these beings are mentioned in terms of their lifespans. What are we to make of that?
Well, we had a version of that was taught in our seminary, and it had to do with creation and the flood. But if you'll notice something, the first mention of the lifespan of mankind being decreased was in between the verses that talk about the Nephilim and the beginning of the Noah story. There's two little verses in there. It talks about the Nephilim and all that, then it says, "And God's Spirit would not strive with man forever, for his years will now be 120 years." And it's whoever's writing about this whole event is talking about the reduction of the lifespan. Now, some of your creationist scholars, and when they're talking about the flood, we were talking earlier about how did this happen? What were some of the geological things? Some of the things that they surmise, and it's based on some of their geological studies. And I think of guys like Edmund Morris, I think Edmund was his first name, big creation theorist out there. But he writes about the lifespan of human beings being greater because there was this UV protection, so to speak. He said before the flood, the antediluvial world, he said he bases it on the verse that says the windows of heaven were cracked open and came crashing down. He talks about there being a vapor canopy that covered the earth at the time, and that it's almost like you would go out any given day, and it was always hot and humid and hazy. You'd never really see the blue sky. You could see the hazy sun, and this canopy blocked the UV rays and therefore allowed men to live longer. And at the flood, that was broken down. For the first time after the flood, they saw a blue sky. This is the theory that they put forward, and they base it on their facts, which I don't know all their facts, but this is the theory they put forward. So I happen to think that the Nephilim had been with mankind from the time of the Garden of Eden. And that whole, we talked about, I alluded to the impregnation of Eve by Nakash, the serpent. Nakash being the bright, shining one. I believe Cain, one of the twins of Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, I believe Cain was the first of the Nephilim. And that carried on all throughout, all the way up until the time of the flood. And so the earth was populated with these beings. And you don't see any of these great lifespans after the flood. They all took place before the flood. They ended at the flood, and there's even that mention, man will now be 120 years, will be the max lifespan.
Well, another interesting thing, Scotty, that I want to bring up too, and I think your observation on that is interesting. There's a couple of things. One is, if Adam and Eve were the first humans and they begot a family, you would have to have some serious incestuous activity going on in order to populate the earth. So to bring in a some sort of other genetic strain into the picture would make sense. And
I think there's a. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off there.
That kind of leads some credence to the idea of outside genetic influence.
Well, I wrote a chapter in New Page Books, Lost Civilizations and Mysteries of the Past. It was an anthology book with about a dozen or so authors, and I was one of them, and I wrote on Cain and the other people. And it's an interesting story. You've got Cain and Abel, and it's interesting that God at the curse, he says to the serpent, there will be enmity between the seed of the serpent and the seed of the man, or the seed of humans. And what you've got then, the next story is about Cain and Abel. And Cain and Abel, Cain was a tiller of the ground, and he offered up the first fruits of all of his vegetables and his crops and burned them as a sacrifice. And then there was Abel, who was a shepherd, and he offered up the blood sacrifice. Therefore, God accepted his sacrifice. There was something about the blood being shed. And Cain was jealous, so he murders his brother. And this is the story that we're given. I thought it was very interesting in this whole text. It's either it was something that happened and we just don't know about it, or it was omitted for a reason, or it didn't happen. You see all these conversations that God has with Cain.
I'll tell you what, we have more conversations coming up with Gene and Chris. You're in
the Paracast.
America's #1 source for independent talk radio for over a decade. We are the GCN Radio Network.
Hi, Ted Anderson announcing a great way to listen to radio on the telephone. By calling 760-569-7700, you'll be hearing GCNlive.com programs in seconds. Come to GCNlive.com, find your favorite host's dedicated phone number, and hear them 24/7. You heard me right. Every show has a dedicated phone number. Stop by GCNlive.com and bookmark their number today. And again, that's 760-569-7700. We the people grow cotton, weave fabric, engrave ink, embed strips and fibers to protect from counterfeit and carting to a private bank, having it led back at interest, forcing taxes to service debt. This capitalism, or was Jefferson correct when stating a central bank issuing the public currency is a greater menace to the liberties of the people than a standing army? Ted Anderson, I'm placing a free silver dollar in a book that explains our monetary system. Call for your copy, 800-686-2237. It's time to understand the system. Call 800-686-2237. That's 800-686-2237.
Welcome back to the Paracast, the gold standard of paranormal radio. And now, here's Gene Steinberg.
With Gene and Chris, you're in the Paracast with Scott Allen Roberts, and we're trying to talk about these conversations they had with the creature they perceived to be God. So we assume, of course, E.T. was multilingual, but then I guess the ultimate question here in our final few portions of the show is trying to identify who or what these creatures might have been. Were they E.T., divine beings? We'd assume they'd be divine beings based on our state of civilization way back then.
Well, that's certainly how ancient men perceived them, at least the records we have in religious historical accounts, like the book of Genesis. I find where we left off, I was talking about Cain and all these conversations God had with him.
Right,
he
of course.
warns Cain. Then when Cain murders his brother, he talks him the famous question, am I my brother's keeper? He says, you're going to cast me out, you're going to exile me. He says, how do I know if I go out there that people who find me won't kill me? And the big question is, okay, let's see, there's Adam, there's Eve. The Hebrew genealogies were pretty meticulous. There's nobody else mentioned except Cain and Abel. And now there's a chicken scratch through Abel. So you got these three people, according to the text. And then it says Cain leaves and he impregnates his wife and bears a child, names him Enoch. Not the Enoch of the book of Enoch. This is several generations earlier. And then he builds a city and names the city after Enoch, which, by the way, the etymology of the old words, by the way, Enoch, if you look at it through the filter of the ancient language, the E becomes an I, the N becomes an R sound. There's no logic to it. I don't know why it works that way, but that's what it did. Basically, the word Enoch is the word Iraq or Uruk. And so there's a city, Uruk, in Iraq today that actually, by definition, over the centuries has come to mean the original city. So they think this is the city that Cain built in the Mesopotamian Valley there in Iraq. But all of these, how do we know who was interacting with Cain at that time? We don't. You brought up an interesting point a while ago. Were there two factions that were dealing with humanity? We don't know that for sure, but what we do know, what we have called the war in heaven, Lucifer's fall and things like that, and there's the good versus evil, those all seem like such simplistic ways of describing something. That's a religious way of describing something, but there was history to it as well, as we've already determined. So were they dealing with God? Were they dealing with Lucifer or Satan or angels or demons, or were they dealing with different factions of extraterrestrial beings, non-human entities? We don't know for sure. What we do know is that they seem to be set up at odds against each other. And the bloodlines from Eden, when God curses the serpent and says there will be this enmity, this conflict constantly between the seed of the serpent and the seed of humans. This sets up why you have all the genealogy. You know all those long, boring chapters of genealogies in the Old Testament where, Methuselah begat Ahab and Ahab
lots of begats in there.
Lots of begats. In the Hebrew tradition, all these genealogies were taken to the firstborn sons of every family, and they might have skipped a generation here or there, but sometimes father was called grandfather, or so on and so forth. But you got all these genealogies set up. When you get to King David, you finally trace his genealogy back to Adam, but they don't take it traditionally through the firstborn, Cain. They take it through Abel, the secondborn. You go, why did they do that? Then you get to Mary, the mother of Jesus. Now you're talking about New Testament theology. Let's presuppose, for the sake of this conversation, the argument that Jesus of Nazareth is indeed, or Yeshua bar Yashaf, the son of Joseph, he is indeed the Messiah. Well, what his followers did in the Gospels, they traced Mary's family back to David because they had to establish that Jesus was of the line of David. That was one of the post-Davidic prophecies of the Christ, is that he would sprout from the royal line of David. And then they traced David again back to Adam through the lesser-born Abel. Now, why did they do this? Why did they break tradition and trace him to the lesser-born? I think there's a reason for that, and it's the whole bloodline issue. In the Hebrew way of thinking, Messiah meant kinsman redeemer. It was a redeemer for mankind that had to come from one of us. He had to be full human blood. There's that whole theology. You hear it at Christmas time in church. He was one of us. We hear all that stuff about that. That's an ancient Hebrew theology based on the kinsman redeemer. Now, why did they trace his line back to Abel instead of Cain? Because Cain was not of the pure human blood. And Noah was traced back to Abel, to Adam, because Noah was the only righteous, quote-unquote, the only pure-blooded man, pure in all his generations, not tainted by the blood of Nakash or the blood of this other race. And so there was this distinction, and that's why God, even in the garden, said there will be enmity between the seed of the serpent and the seed of the humans. There is a dual bloodline that existed. And the Messiah, the kinsman redeemer, that whole theology of the kinsman redeemer was built that it had to come from the pure bloodline, and this is why Abel is mentioned. But it's never explained in the passages.
David
Say
Icke's
that
been
again?
trying to explain it and talk about
David Icke.
reptilian bloodlines and stuff.
As a matter of fact, my follow-up book to this book is I'm working on. It's tentatively entitled The Reptilian Enigma, and I subtitled it, it's all going to get changed, I'm sure, but I subtitled it The Pervasive Presence of the Serpent in Human History, Religion, and Alien Mythos. Now, I think David Icke, and I mention him in my book, I don't like David Icke, personally. David Icke, to me, is an anti-Semite. He is somebody that promotes racism, as veiled as it may be, but he is no different, and pardon me for saying this, I see him no different. He's a neo-Nazi as far as I'm concerned. He's saying the same things they said in the final solution under the Third Reich. There is a race that is responsible for all the ills and woes of mankind, and David Icke will put forward the same idea. Now, maybe I'll have a beer someday with David Icke and he'll correct me, but this is what it looks like on the surface. You go to his website, and these are the things he teaches. He fills stadiums. I think David Icke is somebody who has taken this theory and maybe started with something that was pretty cool. You know, he had an idea there and it worked, but it is now transformed
Scotty,
for him
Scotty,
into something. Go ahead.
Scotty, 1 second here. In reference to David Icke, I think, what's the old adage? If you steal from one person, it's plagiarism. If you steal from a bunch of people, they call it research. I'm not sure. There's not many original ideas there. I'm good friends with his soon-to-be ex-wife. She's actually a very dear friend of mine, and she kind of made me go down and watch his 8-hour presentation a couple years back in Phoenix. And
Lucky
of course,
you.
I had a front row seat. I had to wear my sunglasses so he couldn't tell I was sleeping. But he spent the whole first 4 hours admonishing everybody for we're responsible for creating our own reality, and the quality of our existence is all self-determined.
Basically, the same story
which sounds great. But then he spent the next 4 hours after I'd left scaring the bejesus out of everybody with all this reptoid talk. So
I'll tell you what, Chris, I would never stand 8 hours for anything. You know, I don't see how that could happen. I wouldn't stand for 8 hours of me.
You know, I'm a huge Star Trek fan, and I sat once back when I think it was 4 or 5 was coming out. The number 5 was coming out, and they had this thing called Sit Long and Prosper, and you could go to your local theater that sponsored it and watch the first 4 Star Trek movies. That was 8 hours. I love Star Trek. By the time I was through the 3rd movie, I'm like scratching my ass and going, man, I'm hungry.
Then you say, I'm just going to watch Star Wars movies after this. That's all. You gave up on Star Trek. No, I couldn't watch any of these movie festivals. Now, exception here, some of these old movie serials back from the 40s, like, for example, Captain Marvel with Tom Tyler. Now, I could watch that, which is like 2.5, 3 hours if you watch the entire 15 chapters or so, or 13 chapters.
Right.
I could sit through them. Okay, I've done that with a few of those movie serials. But actually going through a movie festival, after the first couple of movies, I'm gone.
I once hosted at my house a few years ago the complete, let's all get together. I got about 12 people came over. I had a bar in the house with a big TV, and we watched all 3 of Lord of the Rings extended plays. And we had lunch and dinner and all of that. It was fun. We had a good time. But that's a long time to sit on your butt and listen to anything. And by the way, Tolkien, I think had a handle beneath the subtext of his fictional stories on stuff that was going on.
You know what? I'm going to ask you about that in our next segment. Scott Allen Roberts brings up Tolkien on our show this week, and we've got to explore this with Gene and Chris because you're in
the Paracast.
We also have swag. We have all these exclusive Paracast things that you can buy. We've got 60 or so different items, and entails T-shirts, sleeves for notebook computers, iPad cases, mouse pads, the Paracast Jumbo tote bag, all sorts of T-shirts and jackets and stuff like that for men and women. We have a Paracast aluminum water bottle. All this stuff, you go to store.theparacast.com, store.theparacast.com. What makes it special is that the items are the best quality, great T-shirts, fabrics, and they have our official logo on them. That's what makes them special, in multiple sizes and colors. We even have stuff for children. stuff for women, stuff for men. We have all sorts of sizes, like small up to X large. A lot of good stuff. That's the swag from the Paracast. If you go to store.theparacast.com, stop by and take a shopping tour.
Introducing a diabetes breakthrough, an easy, natural, organic way to bring relief to diabetics. Introducing MDS Forte, a concentrated super-strength extract formulated for those who are looking for relief. What can MDS Forte do for you? MDS Forte reduces glucose levels safely and effectively, reduces cholesterol and triglyceride levels, increases HDL or good cholesterol while reducing LDL or bad cholesterol. MDS Forte reduces A1C, improves eyesight and circulation to the limbs, and helps with weight loss. Is non-toxic, caffeine-free, 100% natural, 100% organic, and comes with a 100% money-back guarantee. Waiting for the side effects disclaimers? With MDS Forte, there are none. Order a 25-day treatment of MDS Forte by calling 213-405-5355, 213-405-5355, or visit bestbloodsupport.com. That's bestbloodsupport.com for MDS Forte, a diabetes breakthrough.
What if pain could be reduced, ailments could be alleviated, physical and mental stress could be eased, and blood circulation increased, all by simply lying down? Introducing the original Biomat. The Biomat is an FDA-registered medical device that combines deep-penetrating infrared space-age technology and revitalizing negative ions with the incredible healing power of amethyst crystals. A Biomat can boost your immune system, relieve pain and stiffness, reduce stress and fatigue, and assists in detoxifying your body. Join the thousands of people reporting relief from chronic pain, fibromyalgia, arthritis, sports injuries, insomnia, and much more. Each Biomat comes with a lifetime trade-in and 3-year warranty. Learn more at bio-mats.com, spelled bio-mats.com, or call 360-944-8692. That's 360-944-8692. Visit bio-mats.com today and enhance your life with a Biomat.
Folks, Iran and the Mideast nuclear mess is already ballooning our gas prices. Whether you're struggling with food costs, which are being blown up by gas costs now, or know that when the Mideast showdown explodes, whatever food supply you have is all you'll get because of huge panic demand, eFoods Direct Family Packs are the answer. Now, the most affordable best food is saving you up to 50% compared to other poor quality food companies. The new Alex Jones Quick Fix Family Packs save you so much money, the savings from eating this food will actually help you pay your other bills. No matter what effect the Mideast crisis or the crashing economy have, you'll have food as delicious tonight as 25 years from now. Order now for 50% savings and free shipping on these affordable family packs. Call 800-409-5633 or efoodsdirect.com/Alex. Call 800-409-5633 or efoodsdirect.com/Alex.
We'd like to hear from you. If you have a comment or question about the Paracast, send it to news@theparacast.com. That's news@theparacast.com. And if you'd like to catch up on past episodes, we have hundreds of shows for you to download direct from theparacast.com. That's theparacast.com. Or check us out at iTunes.
With Gene with Chris on the Paracast with Scott Allen Roberts, and you raised the name of a famous fantasy fiction writer. He had his hands on something there. He was saying something other than just enjoyable fiction.
I think he had his mind wrapped around something. And let me preface it by saying this. One thing you'll find when you crack open the real small story of the Nephilim, you find out it is a huge story. It is all-encompassing. This is a story that when you go through the theological line through the Hebrew Scripture, you will find this is a huge story encompassing all of mankind and all of mankind's events. You bring David Icke into the picture, and you find that he has taken off on that in a totally different trail, sourcing in the same stuff, and it's affecting all of humanity. You look at Tolkien. He wrote a book about orcs and humans and elves, and he was talking about the third age of man and all of these things. If you start really digging apart some of his stuff, you'll find that he was latched into some pretty deep mythology sources back in all of this Nephilim stuff. First time I ever really noticed it was, there's two things in particular, the elven folk, and then there was the calling up of the demonic armies, the orcs and so on. There's a legend, I think it even goes into this, the Freemasons. And I'm not talking about the Freemasons now, but the Freemasons talk about, who was it, Hiram, who was supposed to be the guy who architected the first temple.
Biff.
Yes. They say that Solomon had a ring, and that this ring was something that gave him power over the demonic forces to come, and he could call the demonic forces, the evil forces, to do his bidding.
Scotty, Rosemary Ellen Guiley, who's done quite a bit of research into this whole scenario, would argue with the demonic tag that you're placing on these entities. She argues for the interpretation of these forces being the jinn, which I find very compelling. I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, and that is a hot topic right there, too. You know, this is something we're only starting to resurface, these stories of the jinn. I believe that Tolkien, when he was writing, knew this stuff, and he incorporated it into all his writings. You look at the elven folk and the way they are described in his writing. The Tuatha De Danann I mentioned earlier, when they were the Celtic people's version of the Watchers that came down, the kings from heaven, the bright shining ones, tall, elegant, bright shining king. And they became known as the elven folk who receded into the hollow hills. The word El, I'm sorry, there's a direct correlation to Elohim, El, the name of God. El, that's used as the suffix to all the great archangels, Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, all these different Azazel, all these angels bore the name of God at the ends of their names. The elven folk the same. I think Tolkien, this is one, pardon the pun, one bright shining example of him extrapolating that information over into his fictional stories. And we all know he was using those books to really put out his poetry and things like that, and all the songs he'd write and the linguistics he would study. But his whole sub-basis to the whole thing was all these theories of these cultures that existed pre-Adamic culture, pre-biblical culture, but they all link into all these different beings. So it's hit our fictions in different ways, because it's out there. It's there and can't be denied.
Well, again, Scotty, I think that there's a lot of work that you just can't really do. I mean, you can only go so far with this material because of its antiquity. I think that it's very entertaining when someone like a Zecharia Sitchin gets involved and starts spinning it off in one direction, and David Icke, if you're entertained by fear-based stuff, spinning it off in another direction. But the bottom line is, unless we occasionally will see, these archaeological finds that are gradually pushing back the earliest versions of these stories. But so many people were involved in editing and writing the Bible. I think I read an article once that they've estimated that upwards of 60-some people probably wrote the Bible.
Right.
Unless you have a very strict oral tradition, as you find in many indigenous cultures, all this stuff is subject to interpretation and obviously has been twisted, folded, mutilated, and spindled through time. So you go around and around in circles with this stuff, but there are really tantalizing indications that we interacted at some point with a non-human intelligence that was exalted in the eyes of us lowly humans.
And you can't deny that something happened. It's defining what that something is. Sad to say, it really is, and we've said it before in this conversation. A lot of it is based on what your starting point is as to what you believe about these things, and then breaking free of that starting point if you find something is different than what you believed. My view of God has changed immensely just in the writing of this book, because I saw God in a very different way than I understood him through all the theology I learned.
Yeah, he was scary back in the Old Testament days, boy, the wrathful God. When he got angry, it was like, oh boy, duck and cover, here it comes.
He wasn't Morgan Freeman. He wasn't George Burns.
Yes. I think it's interesting about God that you find, now again, here's Moses, this guy who I think was establishing his leadership over Israel, and his background was to become the Pharaoh god of Egypt, but instead he became the Pharaoh god of Israel. You see all these things he writes about God. You see him changing God's mind. God was really pissed off because the people were worshiping the golden calf, and I'm going to destroy all these people, and I'm going to start it all over in you, Moses. And Moses, oh no, in all humility, no, God, you can't do that. You know why? You'd be breaking your word because you promised promised this to Abraham and his seed. And it says, and God repented of the evil that he was going to do because Moses, a man, convinced him that he was doing the wrong thing.
What's wrong with that picture?
What's wrong with that picture is you've got the all-knowing, almighty, omnipotent, omniscient God suddenly having a guy change his mind.
Yeah, scratching his beard.
Moses was just a guy. When you boil it down, he was a guy, and he had motivations and ambitions like anybody else. I also found it very interesting in the writings of Moses. It's right there in the book of Numbers when the children of Israel were wandering in the wilderness for 40 years, and it says, and Moses set up his tent outside the camp because he was the leader. Moses is the guy who wrote this, and it says, Moses, and God would come down in the form of a cloud and settle on Moses' tent. And Moses would talk to God, commune with God face to face as a man talks to his friend. But then 9 verses later in the same chapter, you got God saying, and no man can see my face and live. Moses wrote this. What was Moses writing?
Yeah, little schizoid.
I'm more than a guy.
I think he was
in
in need of an editor to have plot consistency. You know, we have
Moses
continuity people in motion pictures, by the way. You switch scenes and the clothing can't change. Sometimes it does. You see these silly errors where suddenly somebody is wearing totally different clothing, or the car that was wrecked in the previous scene is now fixed again. But Moses couldn't have done that, could he?
Now, is that a contradiction in Scripture? Some people go, oh, see, the Bible's full of contradictions. I don't think it's a contradiction at all. I think the subtext there, Moses, who wrote the chapter in the first place, was establishing that I am not just a man. I am the Pharaoh God of Israel. Wasn't that his punishment at the end of his days?
Scotty, if he was the Pharaoh God of Israel, I never could figure out how the Israelites could wander around for 40 years in the Sinai, which is not a very big place. I mean, boy, he may have been godlike or something, but he sure needed a GPS unit or a good navigator.
You know, and why didn't those people say, screw you, I'm going over there, where there's grass? This is something, too, I always wondered about. If you or I, ask yourself this question, if I stood there on the shore of the Red Sea and I saw the waters miraculously part and there's dry ground and I cross and I'm looking at whales swimming in the walls next to me and I get to the other side and Pharaoh's army chases me and God miraculously closes it on Pharaoh's army. If I saw that one event in my whole life, would I ever think that God wasn't who he said he was?
We're talking to Scott Allen Roberts. You're with Gene and Chris. You're in
the Paracast.
Are you tired of searching for great talk radio?
Something more important.
Search no more. We are the GCN Radio Network.
Graphic Converter is the image manipulation tool for the rest of us. It does not use any database. You get full control of all your files. Want to view the images of a folder? Drag it into Graphic Converter, and a powerful browser opens up to show your image files. You could use it for slideshows. You could use it to import images from digital cameras or from scanners. Need to do some image editing? You can do that too in Graphic Converter. Also print catalogs. Convert from so many formats I can't even list them. Download now to see if Graphic Converter is good for you, like 1.5 million other users. Guess what? You could save money when you buy Graphic Converter. Use the coupon code Night Owl. Use the coupon code Night Owl to get a special price for Graphic Converter. Go to lemkesoft.com. That's LEMKE soft.com. lemkesoft.com. LEMKE soft.com.
Have you ever seen a U.S. postage stamp featuring Abraham Lincoln, Ben Franklin, or George Washington? If you're into stamp collecting, you know it's a fun, affordable hobby. America's leading stamp dealer is the Mystic Stamp Company, and they want you to have their free 140-page color catalog. Go to MysticStampAd.com, the website of the Mystic Stamp Company. Serving stamp collectors since 1923, Mystic Stamp is well known in the industry for its experience, superior customer service, and an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau. Go to MysticStampAd.com to request your free 140-page U.S. stamp color catalog, packed with collecting tips, special offers, color photos, and over 4,600 available stamps. Call 800-433-7811 or go to MysticStampAd.com. That's 800-433-7811 and ask for your free U.S. stamp catalog or MysticStampAd.com. Mystic Stamp Company, America's leading stamp dealer.
Iodine protection packs from hempusa.org are now in stock for immediate delivery worldwide. Our iodine protection packs include microplant powder, green life kelp, red palm oil, and our clear roll-on iodine that will feed the body the iodine it needs. All iodine protection packs are in stock, save you money, and ship for free in all 50 states. Visit hempusa.org or call 908-691-2608 today. HempUSA.org has a revolutionary wonder food for detoxing the body and rebuilding the immune system. Microplant powder can help unclog arteries and soften heart valves while removing heavy metals, virus, fungus, bacteria, and parasites. Plus, it cleans and purifies the blood, lungs, stomach, and colon. Keep your body clean with microplant powder. Visit us at HempUSA.org or call 908-691-2608 today.
What is the most abundant resource on Earth? Water. It's essential for sustaining life, but it's not always the most available. When disaster strikes, water quickly vanishes from store shelves, like it did during 9/11, Katrina, Japan, and in Joplin. 3 days without water and your body begins to shut down. Don't risk being without an abundant supply of water when the next disaster hits. Get a FlowJack hand well pump. The affordable FlowJack drops right into almost any well and is easy to install without having to remove the existing pump, giving you immediate access to plenty of cool, clean water. You could risk your family's health on a limited supply of stored water, or you could be prepared with the reliable, affordable FlowJack backup hand pump kit, delivered to your door for only $3.99 complete. See how it works at FlowJack.com, spelled FLOJAK.com. Be sure to spell FLOJAK.com or call 855-4FlowJack. That's 855-435-6525. Proudly made in America. FlowJack hand well pumps. Peace of mind in a box.
This is Jim Mosley, editor of Saucer Smear, and I'm here to say a good word or two about the Paracast, which I believe is the gold standard of paranormal radio. Listen to it if you can.
Scott Allen Roberts joining us. We're trying to look at what was seen in ancient times with Gene and Chris and the Paracast. And this raises always the big question here. So we have all this literature. We have the Bible. We have the Koran. We have all these sacred texts around the world talking of interactions with higher beings. So how do we find a focus on this? How do we ever, or is it even possible, prove this one way or the other? And you have to wonder, all this interaction took place in ancient times, and we still have UFOs and strange things happening now, but the interaction doesn't seem to be quite as blatant. So I guess the question would be, did they just set us loose and leave, or did they just come back and watch us? Why did it all change?
I look at it this way. I look at the life of Abraham in the Old Testament, and we think, wow, what a great patriarch. He had all these interactions with God, and yet you only find that he had two. And he was 100 years old when they started. He saw God, and God told him to go to the land of Canaan. Then he wrestled with, or it was Jacob that wrestled with God. So I look at this and I go, here's a guy that we hold out to be this great patriarch, this great man of God, and he had one 5-minute experience in a dream that governed the rest of his life. I think that's what we have to do with this stuff, is say, it seems like it's more subtle nowadays, but all through history, don't we have some of the same things that we see that we can point to that? You look at the stories of incubus and succubus. You look at the stories of, especially the last generation, of alien abductions, impregnations, and things like that have gone on. Is this any different than what supposedly happened back when the Watchers descended down? Was it just more overt back then? These beings came in and did they announce themselves, hey, I am a son of God, and I've come to impregnate you. How did they do this? We don't know how they carried out their task. It could be still happening today. An interesting thing in the Genesis passage where it talks about God is going to wipe out this race, but it also says right there, and the Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterward. And then you see several accounts in the Old Testament where it talks about, oh, we can't do this because those are the children of Anak, the children of the Nephilim. So it was either an ineffectual judgment. God passes this whole big watery judgment on mankind, wipes them all out, and oops, it didn't do what I wanted it to do. because they're still here.
Scotty, the Book of Jubilees that talks about that 10% of the offspring of the Nephilim, I guess, evidently survived, but
Yes.
disembodied, if I remember correctly.
Well, here's an interesting passage in Enoch, and this is a portion I hit in my book because of some of the paranormal research I've done over the years. There's this whole thing about demonology. Oh, my God. If I had a nickel for every time somebody approached me and said, I'm a psychic, I'd already have a small Caribbean island that I'd be retired to. And then if I had another nickel for every time somebody said, I'm a demonologist, I'd buy another island. There's this whole armchair demonology thing out there, but the whole demonology craze has hit in the last few years, I think with the advent of the pop culture of all the ghost hunting stuff, not to mention any names. But I think that this has brought on this stuff, and people approach it so cavalierly. Enoch talks about demons. Now, what do we say demons are by definition? At least by Roman Catholic theology or Christian theology, they're the fallen angels. That's what we talk about. Now, it's interesting, in Enoch, after he gives all this information about the Watchers and the Nephilim and so on, he says, now the spirits, the ghosts of the Nephilim who perished in the flood, he said, they are the ones that were born on the earth, and their spirits will remain on earth. They corrupted mankind and tormented mankind while they were alive in the flesh, and they will continue throughout time to corrupt with their spirits mankind.
Sounds like the jinn to me.
Sounds like the jinn, sounds like the demons, sounds like whatever you want to call it. I believe demonology roots back to the Nephilim.
Okay, a lot of beliefs here, but again, we have skeptics in our audience who are going to look at this and say, okay, we're hearing another rant about ancient astronauts, and this is fine. These are nice stories, and maybe they are true. But how are we ever going to prove anything?
You know what I think this does? It's like I say, it just adds another apple to the apple cart. All those skeptics out there who are skeptical of this kind of thing, start looking at the theology and say, there's theology that even talks about the very same thing in different clothing. It's talking about this stuff, and you got to start as a skeptic or a scientist or just an atheist or somebody that just doesn't want to believe this stuff or think it's all a bunch of hooey. You got to start looking at it and say, wait a minute, there's so much information out there that bolsters the case that, and yes, we can't prove it. We can't definitively say it was this chrome-colored spaceship that came down and people got off and started having sex with human women. We can't prove that. But what we can prove is that the stories exist, and they exist in all these different cultures and all these different forms. And that says to me, there's where there's smoke, there's fire. Come on.
There had to be some kind of influence. You couldn't have cultures around the world getting information with various levels of interpretation from apparently the same source. Either that source came from a single set of events that spread around the world, or there were simultaneous events amongst all these ancient cultures, which is also just as ridiculous, it seems.
I had somebody ask me a couple of weeks ago, what is they were talking to me about coming to an event and speaking about this, and, well, our event is all geared around the soul and spirit and all of this, and how would your book appeal to the soul? And I scratched my chin whiskers for a minute and said, it doesn't. I'm not trying to appeal to the soul, and I'm not trying to appeal to spirituality. I'm trying to dig into theology and say there's a case to be made here for something, and that case looks like this. It says this in the theology, but it sure looks a hell of a lot like this over here. My main message of this book is stop just regurgitating things you've been taught, whether it be religion, whether it be David Icke, whether it be your pastor, whether it be whoever. Don't regurgitate that and just accept it because, oh, that's a neat theory. I think that's the way it happened. I got a big problem with people saying, well, I feel it was this. Well, that's great. Feel all you want. But feelings do not equate to facts all the time. It's like saying, I had a horse lick my face once. It doesn't mean she was in love with me. So the same
You have to ask the horse. We'll have to basically channel the horse, communicate with that horse and say, were you in love with Scotty?
Let's see. Oh, yeah. She's loving me. I can hear it right now. I hear it in her voice. Can't you hear it?
Lovey-dovey. Yeah, well, I keep saying, I sound like a broken record on the show, that people have to do their own research. You can't let the culture your culture is not your friend, number one, and you shouldn't let your culture be the single source for your research and your belief system. I've also found it very interesting that quantum physicists go to church or go to temple.
Yeah.
Sure. I think there's a certain point that you have to suspend your disbelief, and the only way you can do that is by being up to speed in these areas and really doing your own research.
And I'll tell you, I think some of it might hail back to the fear of letting go of what you were taught. For me, when I say my views of God have changed, I mean that. But I still have the tendrils of my old faith that come up and grab me and say, oh, you're backsliding. Oh, you're a reprobate. You're a heretic. Oh, you're going to hell now. All those things come up.
You'll get over it.
And if you ever think here that maybe what we consider to be visits or interactions with God have nothing to do with it, and there is a God out there, and maybe he, she, or it, they're just laughing at the foolish humans who believe this stuff.
Well, when I said my view of God changed, let me answer it this way. I used to see a God, the God of love, the God that's waiting with open arms for you, the God that does this and does that. I think God gives a hill of beans about human beings.
Now, that almost goes back to something John Keel said a long time ago. And we'll get into what John Keel said about his vision of God, kind of expressed in his theories about ultra-terrestrials, about computerized beings that run the universe, but unfortunately they're not always sane in the way we'd regard as sane.
God is crazy.
Scott Allen Roberts joining us with Gene and Chris. You're in
the Paracast.
The GCN Radio Network, providing the world with hard-hitting talk radio. GCN. Great talk radio starts here.
Is there a secret UFO agenda? Do strange creatures from the darkest corners of the mind roam the earth? Is there evidence for mind control, time travel, or devious government conspiracies? Find out the inside scoop on the latest conspiracies, paranormal activity, and Fortean phenomena when you subscribe to Tim Beckley's Conspiracy Journal. It's jam-packed with stories, special book and DVD promotions, and the best news, it's absolutely free, sent right to your mailbox. Plus, a bonus free email newsletter sent out every Friday. Simply send an email with your name and address to Mr. UFO at webtv.net. That's Mr. UFO at webtv.net. Find out what they don't want you to know.
Attention! Information in this 1-minute message could save your life. Don't wait for the next emergency to happen. Act now to be prepared. Now, more than ever, civilians and communities must communicate with family, friends, and neighbors in the event of civil unrest, natural disasters, or other emergencies. That's why there's civildispatch.com. Civildispatch.com is a universal system that can be used for a wide array of urgent notification alerts. Weather emergencies, civil unrest, emergency responders, Amber Alerts, school or business closings, any need-to-know situation. Civildispatch.com is an emergency dispatch communication system, allowing anyone to quickly and easily send and instantaneously track emergency email and text alert notifications. Civildispatch.com gives you the power of enterprise alerting without the enterprise cost. Don't find yourself unprepared. Learn more and become a member at civildispatch.com. That's civildispatch.com. Civilian Emergency Dispatch System. Peace through preparedness.
Hi, I'm Mark Craighead, founder of Crossbreed Holsters. I designed our top-selling holster, the Super Tuck Deluxe, to solve the problems of being poked, pinched, and gouged while carrying concealed. The Super Tuck Deluxe is the most comfortable, most concealable holster on the market today. We offer a 2-week free trial and a lifetime warranty.
Visit us at crossbreedholsters.com. Don't forget, crossbreedholsters.com. In a coming-apart world, you need something to keep it tied together. That something is Atwood Rope, the highest quality rope made in the USA, from exotic braids for military, rescue, arborists, shipyards, tow line, or boating. Quality rope at affordable prices you and your customers can depend on. Find a dealer or shop online at atwoodrope.net. Enter promo code RADIO to receive 100 feet of 550 paracord free with purchase. Atwood Rope, working to keep the world tied together.
So you're a maker of something. Woodcrafts, fishing lures, glass designs, jewelry, purses, perfumes, goat's milk soap. Whatever it is, you made it here in America. Now you're eager for people to buy your products right here locally, instead of buying competing products made on the other side of the world, right? Then you need to check out localmakers.com. Support America. Buy and sell locally at localmakers.com. Doesn't matter if you're a home-based business or a major manufacturer. Localmakers.com offers an easy way to connect with customers within your local community, as well as across the U.S., simply by entering a zip code. And there's no cost to join. So if you're a maker who needs buyers, go to localmakers.com and stock your products on one of our shelves. Localmakers.com, promoting, preserving, and supporting your neighbors' manufacturing businesses.
Hi, my name is Richard Dolan. You're listening to the Paracast.
Scott Allen Roberts joining us with Gene and Chris in the Paracast. So Chris said, well, what Keel said, that God is crazy. What do you think, Scott?
Well, the old prophets of old and all these holy men over the millennia, it was always said that madmen had some connection to God. Now, is that because you look at the actions of God and you say, number one, if he's what systematic theology taught us in evangelical Christianity, was that God is all-knowing, knows everything, but he does and acts these certain ways, already knowing what's going to happen. If I got up every day and knew everything that was going to happen, it's kind of like Groundhog Day, that movie. Did you ever see that?
Yes.
By the time he's at the end of 10,000 lives, they assumed, he is somebody who knew everything that was going to happen. And yet he went through the actions every day. If God knows everything is going to happen, I go, why did you even start it? You already knew what was going to happen. Is that the act of pardon me, is that the act of a madman? Is that the act of a mad scientist?
Isn't insanity the definition of doing the same thing over and over again and thinking that's going to turn out differently?
Right. I think, yeah, exactly. And so far be it from me to say I know more than God. I haven't thrown out the baby with the bathwater with any of this. I think God is there, and I think that there are things that exist. But I rather like the words of Richard Feynman, the late Richard Feynman, atheist, yes, scientist. I was listening to bits of a lecture of his, and he was talking about all these stories, these holy stories we have. And he was talking about the universe and the vastness of it. And he said, and he got almost impassioned about it. He said, for me, he says, these stories that says that God, in one of his forms, came here to this planet and manifested himself, he says, seems so colloquial, so local in the vastness of this universe. And he said, I, for one, am comfortable feeling lost in the cosmos. And that did something for me, too, on top of all this, is that, wow, in the vastness of everything that's out there. If you go by Sagan, you remember Sagan's famous, which has been mocked over and over, the billions and billions of stars. There's billions of stars in our galaxy alone that could host billions of planets like ours. There's billions of galaxies like ours out there in the universe. That also include, you do your math on that, you end up with this astronomical infinite number. And to say that we are the only thing here, hailing once again back to Sagan's book Contact, that's an awful lot of waste of space if we're the only ones here. And so in tying that into this whole thing to say, if God created this here, what did he create somewhere else? Or if God does not exist at all, and he's a manifestation of our trying to figure it all out or put common sense to things, Take this, for example. You guys, Chris, you've been a paranormal investigator, correct?
Correct.
So you can experience something, and you see it, and everybody might laugh at you at your story, but you're the one who saw it and you experienced it, and you go, I know this happened. But 10 minutes when you're back outside having a smoke and you're going, is that what I really saw? You know, your mind already starts creating cover stories for what you experienced.
Right. I always try to.
Maybe as mankind, humanity, create these vast cover stories for what we experienced, or find ways to explain them. I used an example of Joseph, the husband of Mary. Mary comes to him and says, I'm pregnant, and it's with God's son. And you can see Joseph going, okay. And said he was going to put her away privately, meaning I love her enough, but man, the humiliation, the shame, this is done. I'm not doing this. And then he has a dream, and God comes to him in a dream and says, don't put her away. That's God's son. And he accepts that. But you got to figure, he woke up in the morning and scratched his nuts and grabbed a cup of coffee and looked out at the rising sun and went, was that a dream or was that God? And, you know, he operated by faith after that.
Well, that almost goes with the theory, Scotty, that maybe there's a lot of political correctness in these sacred texts, that they're saying things in a certain way, knowing, well, we've got to frame it this way because we need to have this accepted by the populace. And if we say it another way, or if we even tell them what really happened, well, it's kind of like that song, I Dig Rock and Roll Music. You know, if we really said it, the radio won't play it, so I've got to lay it or say it between the lines. So in this sense, they're doing the same thing, which is they can't say what really happened. They had to frame it in a certain context.
Well, I believe that's part of it as well. I think, doesn't the Apostle Paul, when he writes about his experiences, and he talks about